Maybe I'll insert them in between PowerPoints, but this one actually is kind of simple. The one after it's a little more complicated. So I don't know, we'll see how it goes. All right, so we're gonna look at functions of behavior from a more practical standpoint. We're gonna learn to harness a child's MOs and reinforce their preference to help them change their behavior. This PowerPoint presentation is focusing primarily on replacement behaviors. This has gotta be one of the biggest areas I see lacking in programming in general, regardless of the environment. All right, so what is a replacement behavior? It's a behavior that the client exhibits whose primary purpose is to replace a target behavior, all right? More clinically, it's known as a functionally equivalent replacement behavior, also known as an FER. So if you see FER, assume that it's talking about a functionally equivalent replacement behavior, all right? And all that means is that it accomplishes the same function criteria as the target behavior and is at the same or less in terms of response cost. Response cost, what does that mean? Do you guys know what that means? Response cost.
It takes care of the same, like need.
That's functionally equivalent, right? So you got that part right. But what it has to have the same or less response cost. So what is a response cost? Good, did you bring food?
Not me, then response cost.
You're
I'm
like
sorry.
that guy
I'm
up there in
sorry.
Celebrity Jeopardy right now with this one here with
It's tea,
not
right?
weed. So you have to write on there not weed.
I didn't do it.
I did that.
You did that?
See, she
Excellent.
gave me tea. See,
That's good.
But it's green.
But the trick is it actually is weed, so make sure you don't dry it out. All right, so see the trick isn't that she put not weed on there, it's the trick that she put not weed on there. So
Now we tea.
all right, so response cost.
Is
Honest
it
officer, it's not
where
me.
you,
So.
you get the same kind of like reinforcement, that's it for like.
No, think about a cost, right? A cost is what something takes, it's what something
It takes
needs.
the amount of energy.
That's one way to look at it, effort or energy. So if you're gonna propose something to be a replacement behavior, you're not gonna make it harder. So if Dora's tantruming because she wants a chocolate bar that's on the table, you're not gonna replace that by having her run a marathon to get a chocolate bar. Because that tantrum, no matter how long she does that tantrum, is not as effortful as running a marathon, right? I mean, I don't know how Dora tantrums, but I doubt it could be that volatile. So essentially, you want to make sure that you're basically showing them, don't do it this way, do it this way, and this way is actually easier. So if this way is harder, you're going to get resistance.
So if somebody's stressed eats, it wouldn't be like, it wouldn't be a replacement behavior to say exercise instead. You would want to say like eat an apple instead of a candy bar.
That's one way of looking at it, yeah. Like, or like if you're looking at stress eating, or let's identify stress eating. Let's get a little more specific. Let's just say eating unhealthy junk food. Okay, like eating. Let's be more specific. Eating apple pie, like apple pie, right? We want to replace it with something that's functionally similar. So you're looking at something that's also a food. You're going to look at something that's also sweet, right? And you're going to look at something that is probably easier to obtain too. So the apple pie, you have to bake it. Let's assume it's from scratch and all that stuff, or you have to buy it. Let's assume I'm giving you this bag of apples completely free. I'll even slice them up for you, so you don't have to worry about the insides. So it's similar to apple pie. You know, maybe even sprinkle a little bit of cinnamon sugar, not the same amount. So it's close. Maybe saying, I'll get you this apple sauce. It's kind of similar to like the apple pie, but it doesn't have the flaky, buttery crust. So it's not as bad for you. And after they're conditioned to eating that, then you shape it down even further and say, okay, well, instead of having this stuff that's drenched in syrup and sugar and all that stuff, let's just have it with just a little bit of cinnamon on it. It might actually taste better. A little bit of sugar, not much. Once they're used to that, you shift it down. Pretty soon, you've got them just eating apples by themselves because the response cost hasn't been too dramatic. As opposed to you saying, here, have some apples instead of this apple pie. They're gonna look at you and go, that's not really what I wanted. It's functionally equivalent to a degree, but there's too much effort in the sense that it doesn't really feed the need, and I'm gonna have to deal with a lot of like my body telling me I need fattening stuff, hunger pangs and stuff like that. So
So what's the definition again then for response cost?
A response cost is essentially the effort. It's essentially the cost of that behavior. Because every behavior we know from the 3 dimensions, right? They take a certain amount of time, they occur at a certain amount of time, and then you have repeatability. Temporal locus, temporal extent, and repeatability. So they've got those things going on. Those could basically look at that as a response cost. How many times do I have to do the behavior to get what I want? How long do I have to do the behavior to get what I want? And do I have to do a behavior, and what kind of behavior is it? So all those things go into the response cost. I mean, you could look at this in terms of even looking at it monetarily, right? If I say, yeah, this is a functionally equivalent replacement behavior to this, but it costs twice as much, that's a response cost in the most literal sense. It's like, well, yeah, that sounds really good, but it's not feasible. It's not, person's not gonna go for it because it costs twice as much. Now if you say, here's the same thing as this and it costs half as much, oh, well, wow, okay. Now you're talking. I mean, that thing's foreign and new to me, but if it's half as costly as this option over here, then I'll choose this one. I'll take a shot.
In chapter 4, it starts talking about, okay, you have to do so many tests in order to get this thing.
Right.
Is this the same construct?
That's a
we're
similar
talking about,
concept,
maybe
yeah.
different?
No, it's the same concept. That's what we're looking, that's the repeatability aspect.
Okay.
So like you could look at duration or cost, could be magnitude of cost too. You could look at the fact as what's the nature of the behavior you're having me do. All those things you have to take into account. You know, one of the examples that's really, I think, comes to mind is the example you guys had with the phone. And the kid was escaping to get access to his phone, right? So his primary behavior was he was engaging in these behaviors that were problematic, and the net result is he gets access to his phone. Maybe not without some degree of bothering from staff and stuff like that, so it wasn't maybe completely free, but he was getting access to it. Your replacement behavior for it was you were going to do some work, but you had to be careful that the amount of work you had him do, because he would do this work, then he would get access to the phone, right? And he would get access to the phone for a duration of time unmolested, so he'd get that free time basically to play on that phone. The response cost is the amount of homework he'd have to complete to get access to that
Yeah.
phone. So if you,
much time on the
yeah,
phone for-
and the quantity of the reinforcer too, because you always want to make sure that your reinforcer is worth it. What I mean by that is it's worth whatever you're telling them to do. Just think about it. What do you guys do in your lives that isn't worth it? And do you feel good about it? Because maybe you do. Maybe you are doing it and you're like, man, that wasn't worth it. Do you feel good about that? Do you want to do that again? No. So the things that you do, it's like, well, that was really worth it. You know?
So it's that little cost-benefit analysis that you.
That's
Yeah.
always
Right in
happening.
the head.
And it's sometimes it's not even, I wouldn't even say cognitive, it's almost like subconscious where you're just kind of feeling it out, so to speak, not even
Kind of
emotions.
visceral.
Like, well, that felt good, now I'm gonna keep doing that, or you don't consciously think that. Like, think about food. Like, you're taking that bite of food, right? Sometimes you don't go, that food is good. That food is also good. No, right? You're not doing that because it's on a level that's almost like subliminal. You're just doing it. You're not thinking about each bite. Now, if it's really good
Sometimes
or really
you
bad,
get
yeah.
two German chocolate cakes and you go, well, that one's good, but that one's not so good.
Yeah,
sometimes
so
you
there's
do
the
that.
exceptions are usually the extremes.
Yeah,
If something is consistent, or honestly, not even the extreme, if something doesn't taste, it's kind of like tastes like cardboard, you're like, oh, that doesn't really taste good. So you don't consciously vocalize it or think about it all the time. You can't. But honestly, behavior occurs on that level, and that's what a lot of people miss. They think that it's always a thing where the person is like thinking, well, that behavior I just did, was it worth it? And it's not like that. It's something that usually it's a snap decision. They'll either like it or not. And it's the fact that that's why reinforcement has to be so immediate afterwards, because if you wait too long to deliver it, they're going to get the feeling that wasn't worth it, I didn't get anything. And then when they do get reinforced, they're not going to tie it to what they just did.
I just had a thought with, again, going back to chapter 4, which I just finished reading, because it's a long chapter, of course.
No, yeah, I understand.
Anyway, but easier reading, that's a good thing.
Easier work. Yeah, in some ways.
In some ways, yeah, this is true, but response cost kind of sounds like as they were talking about at the end of the chapter, the pre-med principle.
Right.
Response block would almost be comparable to extinction, in my mind. Would that, on some level, I mean, you're stopping, you're
It
not,
depends,
you're not
it
allowing it
depends,
to
I
go
mean,
through,
in
basically.
terms of, it depends, cause extinction you could look at as being gradual too.
Okay.
Like if you go to the ATM and you put your card in, you enter the code, right, I'm using something direct, not something that's socially mediated because it's a machine. So you're interacting, you're putting in the code, and it chews up your card, and you know, spits it out at you. That's getting, you know, actually one that's more like punishment. Extinction would be if you just put your thing in and it says money not available, then it's like extinction, you get your card back. You feel kind of upset about that, right? Well, extinction can be somewhat graduated. It's not ideal, but it still kind of sends the message across. So let's say you put your card in and you want 60 and the machine only has 40. Okay, well, shoot, now I gotta go to another machine to get what I want anyway. So you can look at it in terms of that way too, if the environment's automatically kind of reducing you. You can look at it in terms of behavioral momentum as well. Premack principle with high P and low P, high probability and low probability behaviors. And yeah, linking them, because a person's already engaging in behavior, they're more likely to continue with the next step.
I don't think we hit that part yet.
Oh, you'll get
Yeah,
there.
yeah, we'll get there.
It's part and parcel with the Premack principle.
We spend a lot of time in schools identifying maladaptive behavior, coming up with a replacement behavior. But where it seems to always break down is who's going to reinforce that alternate behavior
Right.
so it'll achieve a different outcome. Because we spend a lot of time and it's like you draft up all these plans and nothing changes.
That's something that falls in line with the response cost is who's gonna do this?
Yeah.
Who's the person that's gonna be reinforcing this? Because if there is a person that you've elected that isn't able to or misses it sometimes, you don't wanna do that. You wanna be consistent to establish a new baseline.
What is a replacement behavior for drugs and alcohol?
Chocolate.
Mass murder.
I can try that next time. We
That's,
always get that.
that's hard, that is
There's
hard.
been some research with exercise.
Exercise works, other,
We can
this
do
is
that.
somewhat broad. I mean,
You know, I've wondered,
It's like
today,
cigarette smoking
Right.
though,
Sexual.
because those
Yeah.
persons, every time you go to one of those sessions,
Yeah.
it's
Want me to
like,
write
as
that
soon as
down?
there's a break,
yeah. Well, one thing you could look at too is essentially with exercise, you're getting a release of positive chemicals in your brain, you're getting a feeling of a good feeling, right?
yeah.
Honestly, with drugs and with any kind of things like that, people usually resort to those drugs because they're feeling a lacking of something. They're feeling and you could conceptualize it as a lack of reinforcement. So whenever they have a drug, right? The thing about drugs is really kind of, it's insidious, is that the first time you take the drug, it's because you feel a lack of reinforcement. So you're in a semi-aversive state. You're not really punished, but you're not really being reinforced either. So you try this a little bit. It's the same thing as perhaps traveling to a new country or experiencing a new food or something. It's like that. It's like, this is something different. I'm going to try this. Everyone says it feels really good. And they feel that, and they contact that reinforcement. But from then on, it is a negative reinforcer. It's a positive reinforcement in the beginning, but it's a negative after that because the absence of it creates an aversive state. So it's almost like the same. You're going to be looking at anybody who's suffering from any kind of addiction, whether it be alcohol, whether it be smoking. You can tailor, you can trim off the drug, you can wean it off. That's what a lot of rehab places do. There are some blockers you can take as well. Again, it's medical. In terms of what you can do
Yeah,
academically,
in schools, we always end up with this, and then we have to write, student will look for positive influences from the school and will contact
can you get more vague?
teachers, contact
Right? I mean-
teachers or counselors for positive reinforcement to make alternate choices.
The
What
reality
does that
is
mean?
that,
That's not real.
honestly, I mean, if that could be functionally designed, if that could be like operationally designed to be more specific, it probably would work. But it would also have to entail a lot of extinction from the
Yeah.
drug itself, which you'd go through the extinction burst, also known as withdrawals, because in that case, the person isn't going to be engaging in it, the person's body is going to be engaging in the extinction burst. So until you can get to that point, it's really difficult. You can replace something. Here's the thing that's true of all behaviors. A lot of people just try to throw reinforcement at a behavior without throwing some form of extinction. The truth is, if I tell you, do this thing instead of this thing that you've been doing for a whole heck of a lot of time, do this thing instead, what are the odds that you're gonna do this thing? You're not, because we're all creatures of what? Habit. Yeah. Habit is very behavioral. It's basically behavior momentum. You're consistently doing something the same way each and every time. If someone sits in your pew at church, if someone sits in your chair at an event that you're used to sitting at, you feel a little like, wait a minute, that's mine. Now, even though it's not yours, now have your name on it, but you're a habit, and they're using extinction on you by preventing you access to that, right? So you have to have that extinction component. Honestly, for those kind of kids, unless they're having some sort of, I don't know what kind of drugs we're talking here, if we're talking about just pot or if we're talking something really, really addictive.
Would I
Yeah, both, but it's kind of like we have to have a behavior intervention plan.
I mean,
Like,
Because it really depends on the.
In the extreme, you could have them take up skydiving, literally
But
take up skydiving.
This is what I was thinking, if we're thinking
Oh,
of
sure.
behaviorally, they're wanting to access dopamine, serotonin, and norepinephrine, which are the three biggies in terms of any drug addiction. Well, jumping in an airplane is probably gonna give you full access.
Although you have to be 18.
Put it on the
Bungee
IEP sheet.
jumping or something, I
With the
mean,
parents
you
at
know,
home.
access to.
Well,
to-
access to essentially what you're saying is a thrill, excitement,
Mhm.
you know, that can do it too. Positive experiences can also do that as well. There are a few things as reinforcing as success. If you look at a lot of individuals who get started in drugs, yeah, if you look at a lot of individuals who get started in drugs, not including speed, but if you look at a lot of people who get involved in drugs, it's because chances are, if you looked at them before, they were either poor students or they were just kind of like flat line students where they don't stand out any which way.
Well, these
So-
kids they're already in special ed.
Right.
School has never been a positive. one
Exactly. So
necessarily.
that would, if you honestly want to look at it, prevention would be the first thing, making sure that there's other ways that they can engage in that and feel those positive quote unquote vibes. Because honestly, what you want them to feel about school, and I know at first it sounds like wishful thinking, but it's possible, is the same way you feel when you see a Christmas ornament being put up on a tree or on the signs outside, assuming Christmas is good for you. If it's not good for you or means nothing to you, then this example means nothing to you. But assuming that you've had positive experiences with it, when you see that, you get what? Kind of warm fuzzies, a little warmth. That's what you want them to feel about school. And if they don't feel that, then really, I mean, you could say it's part of their upbringing, it's part of their home life, and you wouldn't be wrong, but it's also part of the responsibility of the school as well. Reinforcing the small things is just as important as reinforcing the big things, especially when they can't get to that. If you look at your life, when you're in kindergarten, you got reinforced for every little thing maybe, right? Every grade you graduated, every stage of life you went, the reinforcement took longer and longer to get to you, but it wasn't the same amount either, it was more. Ultimately now you're at the stage in life where you work and you get a paycheck, right?
Or we just work to get stuff off our table or plate.
Honestly, people have to eat. You could get stuff off your plate till the cows come home, but if you don't have food on the table, it doesn't matter to you. So ultimately, it's for that paycheck that people work. If you look at any person who's successful in earning that, and go back to them when they were a little kid, they were still being reinforced for the small things. So looking at individuals like that, you could try reinforcing them as well for the things that they're doing that aren't wrong. Maybe not the best things, but on a tiered level. I've seen that work as well. Because honestly, you're looking for good feelings. Thrills can give you that as well, but honestly, the reason exercise works so well is because it makes you feel good about yourself. Positive relationships with peers, that's another one. With getting a mentor. Sometimes having a mentor is huge. I don't know if there's constructs set up where you can do that, either have a student that's like really successful in school already be a mentor, or someone else who's a teacher or someone that person looks up to. I've seen those work well, very, very well.
The problem in high school is that you have 6 different instructors, so the buy-in or following through on the replacement behavior is not there at all.
And really
That's
they're
where
looking at,
Finding it just crumbles.
what really becomes difficult is when you look at the teachers themselves. Are they the kind of individuals who they don't want to, and you know what? Kids, no matter whether they're ID or gate, have this ability to tell when an adult wants them around or not. They can just tell. And it's purely behavioral. It's not conscious. It's like the eating the food, how it's just like, you know, they can just tell, oh, this teacher really cares about us. This teacher doesn't want to be here. He probably spikes his coffee. So they can tell that kind of stuff just from the raw interactions they have on a daily basis. And that right there might actually be the core problem. I don't know how you would address that. Actually, that was one of my interview questions too. not the spiked coffee thing, but what if you had a teacher that wasn't following your plan? How would you find out, and how would you go about changing it? And I was like,
I hear
Get
from
rid of
our
it.
BCBA's.
you can't get rid of the teacher. That's the thing, huh?
I hear from our BCBA's, that's one of their biggest struggles.
I mean, honestly, for me, it's looking at the teacher's behavior and finding out what paradigms are at case. Sometimes when I'm working with the kids I'm working with, I'm not even fixing their behavior, I'm fixing the parents. So I can imagine it's similar with the teachers.
This is where you really have to be very diplomatic.
Very
Yeah.
diplomatic.
In
You-
terms of
yeah.
saying it in a way that they can hear it.
You say it the wrong
You
way,
say
they're
it
not
wrong,
gonna hear you.
They disengage
Yeah.
and they won't give you any
You
credit.
come across as a know-it-all, which unfortunately a lot of BCBA's do. Don't ever do that. You come across as this cold, callous clinician. You come across as this workmonger who keeps throwing more work on me. They're not going to engage with you. They're not. They're going to look at you as an aversive stimuli, and they're going to react accordingly. Unfortunately, they aren't necessarily paid to handle the behaviors of the kids in their class. They can always just throw their hands up in the air and still hold them to their tenure. So really, if you look at it that way, you need to be as diplomatic, like you said, as people person oriented, and honestly, you have to come at it from the angle as you want to make their lives easier, because right now this student is making their lives hell. You want to be sympathetic. You want to say, you know what? Sounds like you're exerting a lot of energy on this case. It sounds like this kid is really taking up a lot of your time and just slowing down your class, and it's just really uncomfortable. Let's take some of that energy that you're already being forced to use disciplinary-wise and redirect it in a way that's more proactive, so we don't give him the chance to make your life literally hell right now. And actually, who knows, maybe he'll actually improve. Let's give this a shot, because you're already spending a lot of time. Sometimes you observe the teacher, not the student, and you say, you know what, I've noticed he's doing this, this, and this, and it took about 30 minutes out of your class time to deal with it. Is this a ritual? Is this a common thing that happens? Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. That must be very difficult. I completely see where you're coming from. I know that must be very hard. Do you feel kind of stressed out about this situation? I mean, you've got the rest of the year with this kiddo. Yeah, I hear you. Okay, so why don't we just let's see how we can change that, because that energy being spent could probably be spent in other ways, and you might actually see some productivity out of it that might help you, speed your class up. So just coming at it from that aspect can disarm the teacher, because right now they're looking at a person who's a BCBA and they're looking at you as being almost like a watchdog, saying you're going to tell on them.
You're blaming them for.
Yeah, and then you're going to talk to their principal, you're going to talk to their program manager or program specialist, you're going to talk to all these people and basically get them in trouble. So they're going to put on this front. They're going to say, I can't do anything. He's out of control. Blah blah blah. They're not going to give you much information indirectly, so you can't really interview them and get accurate interview results. I mean, it has a lot of problems. So, but yeah, that's a big problem, Keith. Is figuring out who's actually going to be implementing it. In some situations, you can actually use your class to basically function as a way to control the child's behavior. We're going to cover an example of that in the next PowerPoint, of how you can actually utilize the groups, especially for kids that are responding to peer attention, and basically that's what's perseverating their behavior. So you actually manipulate the class through reinforcement to control the child's behavior. Because the child may not care about your attention and what you do or say, but they really care about the people around them. Those other kids, though, they care about what you say. So you can actually control them to control that kid or group of kids in the classroom. Right. So like an example here is, a child who tantrums for a toy for 20 minutes could be shown a way to earn the toy with a task that requires less than 20 minutes. You see what's there? Because a kid is tantruming for 20 minutes. Tantruming is fun, yes? No. Anyone who's actually seen a 20-minute tantrum, everybody's exhausted. The adults are exhausted. The kid is exhausted. It's like exercise without the benefits. They're drained. You give them another way to get that toy that takes less exertion and less time, they're gonna jump at it. All right. So first, we need to look at the target behavior. We need to eliminate and diminish the ability of the behavior to accomplish its current function. So that's what we have to look at. You have to look at the target behavior and what its function is. And that diminish, that's like what I was saying with partial extinction. In some environments, it's unfortunately impossible to do complete extinction, because you don't have absolute control over the environment. If you're in a classroom of 30 students, for example, you don't have absolute control. You may have a lot of control, but you don't have absolute control. So in some situations, you can't completely extinguish a behavior, meaning you can't let a child tantrum for 20 minutes in your classroom, because that's gonna destroy the class, period. Replacement behavior, you want to enable and enhance its ability to obtain access to the desired function. So you've got this target behavior, you've got this replacement behavior, and you want to basically make this one less effective at getting what he wants, because it's already been effective, so you want to make it less. You want to make this one more effective. Because if this one has more access to the desired result, he's going to go with this.
What was kind of interesting in this last chapter I read is the analyst, the child was rushing into the bathroom to get feces, to mush it. And that was a sensory stimulation, apparently, according to the author.
Yeah, I've heard of that kind of.
And they didn't replace the behavior per se. They just added rubber gloves, so that she could go in and do what she needed to do at prescribed times. And they did notice that the behavior did decrease over time. 'Cause when they tried to prevent her from doing it, it's sort of like she had that extinction first. She wanted
Right.
to do it
So
more,
she didn't try to run
focus
away and do
more,
it. She did it more
on it,
with,
yeah.
at their guidance. And I
Yeah.
mean, when you look at stuff like that, that's not the end result. That's not the final criteria. That's just the.
That's a movement in the
Yeah,
right direction.
exactly,
Mhm.
exactly. That's the standard behavioral interval. We're gonna be going over that next in the next PowerPoint, where we're gonna be looking at, okay, this is where the behavior is, this is what we'll tolerate, but this is like not where we want them to be. We want the behavior to be down here. But as long as it's right here, we're okay, and then we're gonna start dropping it lower and lower and lower, and as we keep reaching each area, because dropping from here to here, you're gonna get, the extinction burst is gonna be too dramatic, it's gonna be too volatile, yeah. Dropping it from here to here to here, and then to here, it's not as traumatic, it's not as much of a shock, and the kid's not gonna blow up on you. Maybe a little bit at each tier, just a little bit, but they'll get used to it because they're still getting what they wanted. So, okay, so an example of a replacement behavior is ignoring a child pulling your arm but giving attention when the child says, "Excuse me." Sometimes it helps to have a third person there saying, "Oh, what should you say?" to provide the prompt, because you don't want to provide any attention at that point. And actually, I've seen this skill get taught in like, the shortest amount of time was like 30 minutes. A kid had the language, but he wasn't using it. So we weren't focusing on skill acquisition of using the words, it was using the words at the appropriate time.
I noticed in one reference, I can't remember if it's this book or the other book, that they taught the kid to say, "Shut up and leave me alone." And they did that because, according to them, that they were afraid that if he didn't say those words, staff would continue talking to him, and he didn't want to be talking to him.
That's horrible.
He was gonna hit him if,
Yeah.
So they backed up to that comment instead of a more,
I mean, that sounds more like a
diplomatic way.
staff problem, honestly, because wouldn't want to teach my client to say shut up and leave me alone. It's not really socially appropriate.
Well, they were afraid that maybe even patients or other,
I mean, I could just see that kid with a significant other later, and he wants to be alone. He's like, "Shut up and leave me alone." I don't think that's going to go over very well. Or with the boss saying, instead of saying, "I need to take a day," "Shut up and leave me alone." I need to take a day.
We use that a lot.
Shut up and leave me alone.
that's actually great. Shut up and leave me alone.
Wow.
I would make that my dissertation topic.
Shut up and leave me alone.
But the ignoring in elementary school, we use that a lot.
Ignoring is
so strong.
Ignoring is good if there is a replacement behavior that you know the child can do, that is on the docket, and the child is being reinforced to do it. Ignoring by in and of itself isn't going to really solve anything, and again, ignoring is not just not giving words. And the hardest thing, I don't care. I mean, I've seen some BCBA struggle with this too. Is the attention aspect, because it's not just words. It's the biggest one is reaction. Oftentimes facial reaction. And how kids can tell whether you care about them or not. They're experts at observing you and picking up cues. your face, they can picture, they can see a vein tighten, they can see a jaw clench, and they know they got you. You don't have to say, hey, but they know they've got you, and then you're just ignoring them. The worst thing you could say to a child is, I'm gonna ignore you until you say, excuse me. Because then it's almost like a test of wills. You're smarter than that. You're smarter than the kid. Don't do a test of wills, because I mean, they'll probably be more stubborn than you. Because you can't take the entire day to wait them out. And they know that.
It's the whole catching and being good.
Right. Catching them being good is
That's the
huge.
replacement. So, kindergarten, you just take, Tony, I like how you're sitting, you have your crisscross applesauce, boom, the whole class.
Yeah.
That was magic.
Now, and the sad thing is, no, but think about that. Think about that. It's not really magic. It's group contingency because everybody wants that reinforcement, right?
Yeah.
And you said
No,
it
they're
doesn't.
okay.
You said something that unfortunately is true, but it shouldn't be. You say that doesn't happen anywhere else, meaning other grades, right? You
Well,
notice
it
it.
does, but
First
it's
grade,
not-
it's not as much. Second grade it's even less. Third, it's even less. And
Well,
by the
you're
time you
right.
get to middle school, it's gone altogether.
You don't verbally praise a child from fifth grade on in front of their classmates.
Right,
But I
because they
always
start
think
to
I
get
would pull
right.
them aside, because it's not cool anymore. I would pull them aside.
Well, but the
and
thing,
say,
there are these
"Tell your mom
exceptions
how
though.
amazing you are."
There are these exceptions though that are really interesting. If you notice, they're known as the cool teachers. Oftentimes, they don't have to necessarily be cool. What they are, they're teachers that actually listen. They're teachers that the students actually know are invested in their well-being and don't talk down to them as kids. They're leaders, but you know what I'm talking about. They're
Yeah.
very few and far between.
Yeah.
But those are teachers that I don't care what grade per se, maybe 8th grade is the worst, but I don't care what grade per se, those students like to get, appraised by that teacher in front of the class. Yeah, it's different, but if it's the teacher that no one likes, if it's the teacher that no one thinks is cool and everyone thinks is such a drag, and that teacher praises you in front of the class, it's like you get that on you, and you want to get it off of you because I'm not like that person.
Well, it's not cool to have good grades and be successful in school, especially for boys when you hit middle school and that.
And if you think about that, you can say that that's a societal thing. You can say that our society kind of conditions kids to do that. You could go and take it to that huge, huge plane where you can't do anything about it because it's society, right? And how can you operationally define society? It's this just too big. It's almost like this divine force that's causing your kids to hate school, right? It's much more helpful to know that every classroom is school too, but every classroom can function as its own environment. And you can be that classroom, okay, where the students want that praise, where they want to be noticed. You can be that classroom, but the problem is you're fighting the outside environment's influence. Now the good thing, that's the bad news. The good news is that all behavior is shaped through contingency. So your contingencies can actually shape it to where you're the exception, not the rule. It sucks to be the exception being the class where everybody wants to do well, but I've seen it happen, and I'm sure you have too. It unfortunately isn't very, very common, but if you really look at it, you'll find that it's those teachers that are actually putting forth the effort to actually reinforce appropriately, and they're saying things like, nice job, I'm proud of you, keep it up. They're not making a big deal going, good job. They're being honest and they're being sincere about it. And you know what? At the high school level, they're not saying great work. They're saying, hey, you rock, you kick
Yeah.
ass. Maybe not ass, but you rock. Keep it up. They're saying things like that.
But it takes a long time to establish that.
It
Because
does.
In high school, I've had that, where I've gotten to that point, but it's taken a long time.
It does. But the funny thing is, once you reach that point,
It's easy.
you're there. You're there. It's the struggle is getting to that point.
Yeah.
But once you get there, it makes up for all the effort it took to get there, because every successive year after that, you have a reputation. And everybody wants to be in your class. Everybody wants to, be in this person's class, because this person, they're the cool teacher, and this is. I remember doing that when I was in elementary school. I wanted to be in Miss Whitaker's class, not in Miss what was her name? It was something like, I want to say Canker, but it wasn't Canker class. This teacher over here was really nice and reinforcing, and she had these marbles she would put in her jar, and when you got enough marbles, the class got a pizza party or a popcorn party. This one over here, she would just give you detention, and she'd keep you out of recess. So You know that. You know that. Of course, sometimes parents think that that teacher over there is the better one because they're more disciplined, but then if you look at the scores, you'll probably see more out of here than here.
The movie Stand and Deliver.
That's a
I
good
mean,
movie.
That's really good example of that
Yeah.
whole dynamic.
So let's look at this. Why should we use replacement behaviors at all? Like, what's the point of it? This should be reviewed, you guys. Like, why not just do whatever?
You don't wanna take something away without, you know, putting something in its place, so that
Okay.
the person can get the same outcome, you know, just in a more adaptive sort of way.
Right, because if you just use extinction, if you just stop it, I just want that kid to
They know
stop it.
what
Oftentimes
not to
teachers,
do.
yeah, oftentimes teachers and parents, they don't, exactly, they don't think about, okay, I just want him to stop talking in class. Well, would you like him to fling boogers at you? Would you like him to spit at you? Would you like him to pull down his pants and pee all over the class? Would you like him to throw paper, constantly just crumpled up paper or spit wads in it? Would you like that? No? Well, shoot, what do you want him to do instead? And how does that align with what he wants to do? And if really the trick is getting a meeting of the minds between what he wants and what you want and finding how you can get them to interlay. Because we're all on the same team here. At the end of the day, we all go home. We're all here to get grades, or in the home environment, we're all here to live together. If it's constantly a struggle back and forth, ultimately teacher does win because teacher passes the student out of the class, negative reinforcement, promotion, bye, see ya. But at the end of the day, has any actual learning taken place? Probably not. So what are some of the functions of behavior you need to look at, just off the top of your head?
Before we talked about access, escape, attention, and sensory stuff.
Automatic.
Yeah, automatic.
You'll find that I eschew the word sensory.
Okay.
I take it to mean smell, sight,
Right.
taste, touch, okay,
Mhm.
hearing and that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
I eschew there's this internal mechanism that's just this thing that you have to satisfy with a prickly cushion or a heavy blanket or no. No. I'm very kind of even tempered when it comes to things in general, but that is one where I'm just like, you know what? You give me a heavy blanket, I might enjoy it for a while. It's a little novel, kind of interesting, but after a while, I'm just gonna say, well, this is boring. You give me a prickly seat, I might go, well, that's kind of weird. But after about 10, 15 minutes of that, I'm gonna think it's boring too. You start throwing a combination of those things at me, that might occupy my time as well. But then eventually, I'm gonna what? I'm gonna get bored of it. I have never seen a sensory tool work in the way that they prescribe it to work. Like, look at a chew toy, for example, all right? Chew toy is often, they say it's for children who have vestibular sensory needs, right? They have to chew, because they're chewing on other things, right? So might as well give them a chew toy. Well, the problem with that is that, are you decreasing the chewing? Probably not. Probably not. I mean, you might say, okay, you can maybe get them to ask for it, so now they're not chewing on other things, so it does appear to be successful at that, to that extent. But what are chew toys designed to do with animals? Strengthen.
Actually keep them out of your hair.
Well, yes, but it's also remarkably good at strengthening the jaw.
And cleaning the teeth. It can-
You can clean the teeth with the, you
Well,
give him a chew toy,
but I'd
teach him
rather-
to brush his teeth.
I'd rather have my 110-pound Rottweiler chew on a big plastic toy than chew
Right.
on my leather recliner.
Of course, because those teeth could do some real damage. And it's an animal, right?
Yeah.
Animals don't have hands. Do you think they have a jaw? That's how they grab onto things. They can't grab onto things with their paws. That would be cool, right? They can't do that. They can't do that.
Most of them can. Raccoons can, apes can.
Well, yes. I'm talking about domesticated animals. Most of them can. I don't think there are any that really can't, because the ones that can, you typically find them going through your trash and stuff. So all right, let's look at that, right? So chew toys are designed for animals for chewing. Chew toys are designed for people for chewing, because actually what it ends up doing is it ends up strengthening their jaw. I've had clients that would nibble on you, right? They would bite on you, and it was uncomfortable, and you didn't like it, and it was aversive. Most people didn't like it. But they would never leave deep indentations or break the skin until they're introduced to the chew toy. Because then they're spending hours chewing on this thing and being really good at it. And you know, you tell them to do something, they don't want to do it, and all of a sudden this little chewing thing is now deep indentations in your skin from a very strong jaw, stronger than any 3 or 4-year-old should have. And what do you know? They learn that that behavior, while it may have started just as boring, I just want to bite on things because I get a reaction out of people, now it's like I can get escape, I can get access, I can get all sorts of things, and I'm just going to use it for everything. You see that with hitting a lot too. You don't get a punching bag for a kid who has aggression, right? While you might say you just need him to get his aggression out on that punching bag, you're also teaching him how to be pretty martial. He's going to learn that it hurts when he hits wrong. He's going to learn to punch. He's going to learn to bend his arm. He's going to learn that there's certain ways he can hit that bag, and he's going to start using that on people. And you can't blame him. He's building strength and he's building dexterity, all good things, but
Okay, so
No.
when a kid's throwing punches at you, do you just try to get out of the way? Do you
depends
throw
on the
a
type,
block?
depends on the size of the kid,
Mhm,
depends on the strength of the punches,
mhm.
and how much training this kid has had.
Is
Training
there
meaning
takedown, exercise, things
you
that-
can if it comes to that, but that's usually, honestly, you'd be just as well in a school environment doing a 5150 if a kid gets that aggressive and that strong, like if they get that volatile. But that's why I'm saying it depends on the kid. If we're dealing with the 22-year-old in continuing ed who just, he's ripped and he starts going at you, you're not going to try and, you're not going to block him, you're not going to try and take him down per se. You might just try to contain him until, there's some 4-person holds I know, but you might be able to do that until the law enforcement can arrive because you can't get this person to stop. Maybe they're on something, who knows? But we're dealing with a 5-year-old. Again, it depends on how strong they're hitting. I've seen some kids hit, they're very inept. And I've seen some people react horrendously to that. And I'm like letting that kid hit me, I'm like, I don't even feel that. No, you're gonna keep doing what you're supposed to do. No, keep doing it. Keep doing it. Keep doing it. It's just that simple. It starts out very simple. What happens though if it reacts like this, it's like, do this thing. Okay, you don't have to do it, Okay, and then next time, do this thing. Okay, don't do it. You know what, that's not right, you're gonna do it this time. Do this thing. Do this thing. Oh, whoa, that's worse. Okay, you don't have to do it. What do you think's gonna happen the next
Yeah,
time?
yeah.
And it goes on, and I'm not gonna give myself a Charlie horse and breathe my knee explaining this to you guys, but it gets worse. So oftentimes it depends on where the child is at. It should be in their records how strong they are, and how much damage they can actually do. Because if a child can't really do that much damage, sometimes you sustain the hit to redirect them. You don't have to take it full in the face or in a sensitive area of your body, but you can redirect them back to it. If it's a strong one, you may have to have different things set in place. It really depends on where the child's at. But with hitting, and the same thing is true of biting too. If you keep the jaw out of reach of your limbs, chances are you're not going to get bit. If you're not hugging the child, that's a huge one. Some people like to reach across children who are biters. I don't understand why. It's like putting a turkey leg in front of my mouth. If you keep your arm on one side or the other, how are they going to bite you? They might try, but are they going to get to do it? And if they try, don't go, no, don't bite me. Every time you say the word don't and an action, you're basically saying please. So don't do that. I know I shouldn't have said don't, right? But you guys aren't my clients. If you value your sanity, you will refrain from doing that. Because honestly, the biggest thing is just to move your arm away and redirect them. Eventually they're gonna realize that they're just snapping at air and they're gonna give up. I've seen that happen too. I've also seen it happen where they stop doing it with our staff and they still do it with parents, and the parents are like, why is this happening still? It's
Right.
because you guys react to it like it's the end of the world when he tries to bite you. So he thinks that behavior is very valuable. We don't react that way, and so he knocks it off because it's just monkey business. All right. Now there are some direct access strategies you can use. These are for direct access is another way of saying automatic access or automatic positive reinforcement. Okay? There's alternate direct access options, so you're going to be using differential reinforcement of an alternate behavior. There's access to manding for an item or activity. There's omission training option. This is also known as differential reinforcement of other behaviors, so you're not going to be reinforcing every other behavior except for the target. And then there's the pre-MAC contingency option, which Dora was talking about. All right. So So with alternate direct access option, okay, you're gonna reinforce alternate behavior for access that is more appropriate. So let's say they're doing something to gain access to something. For example, they're going into the fridge to pull out pudding and totally destroying their appetite. You're gonna teach them another way of doing it by basically getting them to ask for it. Sometimes you may need to put a lock on a fridge. Okay, and this actually could be tied in with the next one. It says you reinforce asking for access. Sometimes when you change the function of the behavior with direct access, they're basically getting access, right? So what you're doing is you're converting it from being something they're doing on their own to something that they're now doing by asking you. You might think to yourself, well, this doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Maybe not in the school environment as much as in the home. The home environment's big on this because reinforcers are just lying all over the place. And I get really irritated seeing that because every reinforcer that's on the floor, every reinforcer that's just laying around is one we can't use because chances are it's not a reinforcer anymore because he has complete control over it. You can't make it a reinforcer until you put it under your control, meaning the person has to ask for it. This also has applications to schools as well. Various items in the school, if the students are able to access it willy-nilly, that cannot be used as a reinforcer until you've established control over it. That's why a lot of teachers, when they'll have a little library corner, and talking about elementary, little library corner with books, they can only access those books when the teacher lets them at a very specific time when they're done with their work, right? If they're accessed willy-nilly, the value of those books there is negligible. But I've seen the kids go crazy for those books simply because control has been exerted and that has made it more rare. Remember, you can increase reinforcing value by making it rare, making it special, making it varied, making it huge. There's a lot of things you can do. Or depriving access as well. So by depriving access to it, you're creating an establishing operation for that motivator, or for that reinforcer to be more motivating, because I don't get those books unless I finish my work and it's the right time. So the quicker I finish my work, the more time I get with it. From the first one to finish my work, that means I get to pick which one I want to read too. There's also the omission training option, also known as differential reinforcement of other behavior. You notice this guy, this Sapani and Schock, this book, that they use different words for similar things. That's why I use parentheses a lot, because I want you guys to know that while these words look different, it's the same concept. I don't want you guys to feel like it's an entirely different language, even though at first it might look that way. And you know what, I'm not entirely sure why he's trying to do that, except for maybe what you said last quarter, Dora, where it's just trying to make it more understandable to people, I guess. But honestly, I feel like it does the opposite. Right?
Especially when you're starting out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, so what this one you're going to do is you're going to set a time during which, if the target behavior is not present, access is given to the desired object or activity regardless of other behavior. So let's say spitting is the target behavior, and let's say he spits maybe every minute, okay? Before it gets to that minute point, every time he goes for about 40 seconds or whatever your interval you set for that he hasn't spat, you reinforce him. As soon as the spitting occurs, stop. He doesn't get reinforced for that. The downside to this is what? When there's other
You may
inappropriate behaviors.
accidentally, reinforce something you don't want.
What if he picks his nose and flicks it at Dora? Reinforcement. You know? What if he throws the eraser at Sharon? Reinforcement. Oh, but he spat, no reinforcement. Well, it is going to have a reducing effect on the target behavior, but you may establish new patterns if you're not careful, or reinforce unknown behaviors that he has.
If you're on a fixed time reinforcement schedule, I mean, and they are doing that maladaptive behavior.
Well, fixed
do
time-
you have a little
yeah.
leeway to kind of go?
You
I'll
do,
wait a
you
second
do.
to
They
see
call it
this
a
way.
hold. They call it a hold. So if the
Okay.
behavior is occurring at fixed time, is basically non-contingent. If
Okay.
it's not contingent on the behavior, it's just fixed time. So every minute they get a reinforcer, for example, regardless of what behaviors are engaged. Well, if you notice that a behavior is occurring right at that point where you're going to reinforce, you can add a hold to it and then make that hold be about 10 seconds after 10 seconds after the behavior occurred. The main thing is you want to create a gap between that behavior and your
Yeah.
reinforcement. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know if it was you or Connor from the last corner, we touched on this briefly, and I seem to have a recollection that you really only use this when the maladaptive behavior is like dangerous or
I could see that.
just really sort of off the wall.
I could see that, because I mean, or whenever the behavior you're omitting is so severe and so heinous and so awful that anything else.
I mean, if I'm doing this, anything else is probably better than doing this.
Well, I mean, well, it depends. Like, if doing this is
If
one of the
I'm doing this hard
behaviors,
enough to,
but banging my head against the wall, maybe this is okay.
oh,
But this is not, okay? So it depends, like, yeah, I could see you doing that with that kind of situation as well. The problem is, though, if the child has a series of other behaviors that go along with it that are almost as bad,
oh, okay.
then you're kind of stuck. Now, the pre-MAC contingency option, Dora, this is the one where you pair low preference behaviors with high preference ones. The idea is that basically you're creating a sense of, you're overcoming behavioral inertia and you're creating momentum. Think about it, physics. Inertia is the objects that are still require energy to move, and objects that are in motion require energy to stop, more or less, friction, right? So if you think about behavior as that way, so if something is behaving, stopping it is hard, but it's also true if the behavior is not moving, but you know something is really motivating something else, and pairing it with that, it's almost like you can create this chain of behavior. Think about the game Simon
Writing
Says.
it, and kind of writing it,
Right.
writing the success.
Game Simon Says, okay? Simon Says is a game that every time someone says Simon Says, you do the action that come out. So Simon says, raise your hand. Simon says, lower your hand. Simon says, spin around. Now jump up and down. Oftentimes you lose the game if you do something and Simon didn't say to do it. So jumping up and down right there would have been, But because they get you to move and do all these things, before they even say Simon Says, they say an action and you just do it. And you're like, oh wait, they didn't say Simon Says. Okay, I'm out. It plays off of that principle that you've got them behaving. So give me a high five. All right, jump up and down. Let's clap, let's jump, let's dance. All right, now sit down. All right, open your book. You'd be surprised how fast it works with certain kids. It's really, you have to get them to do, the behaviors have to be behaviors that they like to do, okay? Or that they've mastered to do, that have had a payoff in the past. Thinking about an example I did with my cat. I give my cat these treats, and when I grab these treats, I put them in my thing, I shake it, I let her smell it, and then I point at this cat tree. She knows without fail to run up and jump up onto that cat tree, right? Because that has had so much reinforcement. Well, I wanted her to do something different this time. So I just wanted her to go up on the tree. I didn't have the treats. I just pointed to the tree and she jumped up on it. Okay? I didn't have my hand wasn't like this, it was just like that. Because she had so much reinforcement with that, I know I felt bad because I didn't reinforce her for that. But, you know,
What a bad day.
it was a good explanation. It was a good example of how this action has a lot of reinforcing value, getting her to jump up on there, because she's used to getting a treat after she does something else. She got up there, I didn't ask her to do the other thing, so it wasn't exactly the same chain, but I was able to point and she ran up there. So, yeah, it made me feel bad. Right, so here's some examples. So you can reinforce a teething ring versus a child chewing on rocks. This is like the only example where I would say that chewing on a teething ring might be preferential to chewing on something else.
They like to chew on rocks. They chew on rocks.
Even better. Honestly, I've used gum, but unless they swallow it. You could use taffy, you could use peanut butter. It's a lot of things you can use too. Honestly though, you have to go back to saying, well, what would be another example to, well, chewing on rocks, it's extreme. Let's assume chewing on rocks isn't happening, because that's self-injurious. Let's just assume that they like to chew in general, okay? What would be a replacement behavior that you would come up with for chewing on a teething ring?
Jawbreakers.
Jawbreakers?
Do that.
Oh, not jawbreakers, cinnamon balls.
Cinnamon balls?
Yeah.
Oh.
Okay.
I did
So
that.
another form of edible in your mouth, okay? What else can you guys think of? Talking.
Lollipops?
Talking. What else? Now see, the interesting thing is, there's two ways you can look at replacing a behavior. Sometimes you can look at the topography of it, and that'll give you a clue, right? That might give you a clue. As a matter of fact, that's what most people do. But talking is interesting, because that makes the hypothesis then that maybe the chewing isn't due to some vestibular object in their mouth. Maybe the chewing is something that has happened simply because lack of anything better to do. You see a lot of stemming, a lot of these automatic direct access functions, you'll see them in kids that are what? Nonverbal or non-vocal. They may be sign language, but they're non-vocal, all right? Non-vocal kids have one thing in common in the sense that they all have nothing really to do, because you've basically taken one component of being a human being and put it off to the side, and that's called socialization. I don't care how good you are at sign language, people around you probably aren't as good as you. So you're not gonna be able to have a full-blown conversation about what you saw in the cartoon yesterday using sign language. At least I've never seen that between two kids, right? I could ask you for things. I hate this sign, by the way. You know what this sign is? Oh, I hate it with a passion. Ugh. I prefer this one, even this, huh? What was that? More. It's not good. Don't use it. Don't teach it. Because you can essentially eliminate language with that one word. If I point at like that water and I go, I've just told you what?
More water.
More water, right? If I point at a hamburger and do this, if I point at a TV show and do this, if I point at the playground and do this, eventually you'll start to guess and figure out what I want. I'll go, uh-huh, and then you'll give me it. And it's deceptive because once you start, whether it's this or it's the word more, it's deceptively seductive because it makes you feel like you've taught them a whole lot of things to ask for. They can ask for so many things, and their language is expounded so much, when actually if you take out that word more, they may not even be able to use the word by itself because now they've learned it as a one thing. Forget trying to teach them I want, or can I have, or I would like, or any other type of language, because more, please is just as bad though.
Yeah, because I was gonna say it's the same thing,
Yeah.
please, and then point.
I've seen I've seen thank you actually be bad too. It's more rare, but I've seen it where they start to tantrum for something going, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, and it's like, well, first they'll go like this, they'll point at it,
I'll say thank you.
yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
And you know what? It's you will see 9 out of 10 speeches will go with more. They'll go with please and they'll go with thank you, because please and thank you win over parents. Oh, my child can't speak worth a darn, but at least they're polite. They go, more water, please. More juice, please. Think about conversations. Think about how they start. Think about conversations are funny things. They have words in them. They don't just have the same words. They have long words that are chained together in things called sentences, right? And oftentimes we learn through interverbal, which we're going to go more in depth this quarter. It's very rarely the same thing. If I go, hey Keith, how are you? He's not going to go, hey Keith, how are you? He's going to go, I'm fine. How are you, Keith? No, he's going to go, I'm fine. How are you, Paul? See, there's the differences in the dialogue. Even when you're dealing with something that looks almost echoic, there's differences in it. Oftentimes, though, when I ask Keith a question, he's not going to respond with another question. He might, but if it is, it's not going to be the same question. It's going to be a different one, usually to create a thought-provoking conversation, right? If I don't go, hey, Jerry, crazy weather we're having, he's not going to go, crazy weather we're having, sometimes. But that's not, if that's all that he says, is the conversation going to go on? Because what am I going to do? Crazy. Just kind of dead. So it's bad for functional language is what it is. More is one of those things that actually, you know what? You could take away the word itself and just have the word more. And if you put please with it, then you've got someone who's using the word more, and please makes people want to respond to that because it's so polite. It's such a cute little boy.
Parents do that all the time, like that.
They do. It's I call it one of the cardinal sins of teaching communication, because so many people do it, and then they wonder, they're like, I don't understand why we can't get him to say I want. I mean, he's been using language since he was 4, and he's like 8 now, and all he says is more and this. I mean, I don't understand, why isn't he saying I want? Well, because you've reinforced him for 4 years, just saying more blank. I tell parents we don't touch the word more until he has at least 100 words in the vocabulary, and we don't touch please or thank you until we've actually gone to interverbals. And then you want to work on, they're like crowning achievements. That's what we're going to go for up there, but that's not what we're going to, and it's hard. It's hard. A lot of people think it's deceptive. You think and you feel like you're making so much progress because all of a sudden this kid is using the word more for everything, and they're not just grabbing if you want them to be just really simple, pointing is better than saying more. Pointing. And then once they're doing this, you can start to chain a word to specific things that they're pointing at a lot to build their language. But don't use more, because it becomes such a struggle to get them to stop. Like a horrible struggle. And the older they are, the worse it is. It's like they get to that point and, why are you making me say I want? Everyone's giving me something when I say more. Right? And how can you communicate to this person that I want to open more doors for you with society and with being able to socialize? They're like, forget you. I just need the word more. Yeah. Yeah.
So
It-
what is this?
Help. So, I don't know a lot of sign language. I know, I made up signs with the kids that I worked with. Honestly, I don't use signs I don't really know ASL. I know what are common signs, but then I've made up my own signs too for kids, because the signs are only really just a stepping stone to language. So if I understand that this means go for a walk or play a certain game, and he does this, well then I'll have him use this for a while, demand for it, and then I'll have him start to say ch, ch, and then ch, ch, chess, chess. And after a while, after he's saying chess, which is close enough to chase for me right now, he'll stop doing this. And one time he'll just go chase, and I'll go, let's do it. Then this is gone. The sign is gone. Because this takes more energy than chess. The reason people don't use language is because it's fine motor and it's more difficult to hear when you're not saying something right. Any of you who've learned a second language, you know what I'm talking about. There's this H&R Block commercial. You've seen those H&R Block, get your billions back, America. Have you seen the commercial with the German guy? Where he's like, okay, nein. And he's like trying to teach the person how to say no in German. And the guy's like, nein, 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 nein. Like it's like this, when you're learning a language and you're saying it, it's coming out of your own ears, or your own mouth, and your own ears are trying to hear it. Oftentimes you can't hear how you sound. You might be able to hear loud blocks of language, but the subtle accents and subtle nuances are lost on you, right? So it's tricky, because you might say something and think it's perfectly legit, but if no one responds to you, you're not going to continue using it. That's why it needs a lot more training. Whereas if you get up and walk to the fridge and you trip on your feet, oh, you know what you did wrong, and you won't do that mistake again because you're very much aware of what you did. You can't really look into your mouth and see what you're doing wrong. So, all right, so here's an access demanding, reinforcing a child asking nicely for a toy instead of punching you for it. So, can I play with Barbie as opposed to which is normally got in it before for this kid? Or how about reinforcing the child with attention every minute, contingent on them not spitting on you during that minute. So let's assume that spitting is because they want someone to say, Johnny, don't spit. Johnny, don't spit. Johnny, don't spit. So the minutes where they don't spit, you're showering them with attention. The minutes where they are spitting, you might want to wear a slicker, but you don't reinforce them. Don't worry, they can't spit forever. Their mouth will get dry. Just don't give them a lot of water. I've actually done that. One successfully and one unsuccessfully. The unsuccessfully was, he was a very hydrated kid. The unsuccessfully one, I was smart for this one. I gave him some peanuts, some salted peanuts. He didn't have anything, he didn't have any ammo. He was like, he was asking for water, but we're like, not right now. I'm not gonna die of thirst, just not right now. And he learned not to spit for attention. You can also reinforce a child with access to video games after they finish their homework and chores. So if then. Now, socially mediated access strategies are similar to direct access. Actually, they're pretty much the exact same with two additional contingencies. Group contingency and extinction. Can't do extinction on yourself. Nobody's that strong. Everybody rationalizes and gives in to their, New Year's resolutions, unless you have somebody holding you accountable to it. And group contingency, you can't really do a group contingency on yourself. It doesn't count me, myself, and I. All right? So again, we're not going to go over all the access ones because we kind of did that with the direct access. Just know that they're similar for socially mediated. But we are gonna go over group contingency. This is access to reinforcement is contingent upon the group accomplishing a shared goal. So if the entire class is silent while they're doing their homework for 10 minutes, I'll drop a marble in this jar. For every marble I drop in this jar, it starts to fill up. Once you see it fill up and it gets to the top, we will watch a movie on Friday instead of doing language arts. Trick of the thing is if they're actually doing their work during that period, they're actually doing Friday's homework, they're just not realizing it. So depending on how, remember you're smarter than these kids, how smart you are about how you design this, the kids aren't gonna realize they're doing it. And trust me, I know from effect, even to this day, if I hear a marble falling in a glass jar, hitting other marbles, I feel really, really good. I can't put my finger on it, but I had a teacher that used to do that. It's like, clack, clack, clack. It's just this rich, crisp sound that just is incredibly reinforcing. That teacher did it right. I don't think she ever knew ABA, but she did it right because that's what you want the kids to feel when they're in your class. Because at the level you have, especially up to high school, they don't really care about their classes. They may not even be thinking about college. Sometimes in high school, they're not even thinking about it. They're just jumping through the hoops. Give them a reason to jump through the hoops, and after they start contacting success for what they're doing, they may not care about teachers' praise, but if their parents or their teachers give them rewards for what they're doing, you might start to see a change in their behavior because now it's not, I don't care how nerdy it might sound, but having pizza and watching a movie in class is way better than attending to class or being able to get extra recess time or whatever.
Homework pass.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, they'll work for that stuff. It's not considered, no one's gonna go, oh, you're such a nerd, you got a homework pass. They're gonna go, oh, you suck. They might be resentful of it, but the other person's not gonna care because they're like, yeah, you're just jealous.
Just because if you do group and you do individual, then it works really well in the classroom.
You can. There's nothing saying that you have to only do one thing at a time. As a matter of fact, making things hybrid can actually work to your advantage. You really have to pay attention to the child you're working on. But yeah.
I would do whole class, I would do group tables and then individual.
Because what that actually does is group contingency, it really works well if the child or individual is influenced by the peers. If they don't care about their peers, it will not work. It will not work. What you want to do then is you want to do the hero version of that, where basically they don't care about their peers because chances are their peers don't care about them and they know that. They get made fun of, there may be loners. But if that loner's effort is reinforced on the same group contingency twice or 3 times as much, like meaning if that one person for 5 minutes doesn't do anything, they get 3 marbles instead of 1, kids are gonna notice that. They're gonna go, hey, thanks, awesome, great job, because they're gonna get something. It's like they're viewing it as a solid to them. So sometimes you can use the hero complex if the student doesn't feel or isn't connected with their group. If they're connected, this works. If they're not connected and they don't care and they're off on the side, you just gotta get them rolling. So doing an independent one and then pairing it with the hero one as well, it works really well. You just have to make a connection, and sometimes the teachers don't care. So.
That also works with kids who can delay the gratification. But if kids need that immediate reinforcement, they don't care, and as they get older, they get more socially isolated because the group will blame them for not getting a goal.
Right, so for those ones, you can have an individual one that's more, the goal is always to delay reinforcement. If anyone ever accuses you of using bribery with reinforcement, tell them this. Bribery never stops. If anything, it gets more. Reinforcement is designed to stop and it gets less. So, because I've heard of some parents saying, I don't want to bribe my kid. I'm like, you know what? It's like I'm saying I'm bribed by the university to teach a class. Give me a paycheck. It's not true.
Because you haven't gotten any money yet.
Well, especially this quarter. Yeah. I'll be waiting for it in the mail, Dora.
Okay.
All right. Now with extinction, okay, also known as the, what, Jerry?
S delta,
That's delta.
like what it says there on the,
Yeah. No, I'm doing that on purpose for you because you were asking that on the other slide. So this is denying access to a reinforcer, or denying access to a reinforcer for a target behavior. Remember, Dora, this isn't withdrawing it. This is denying access to it. This is another thing too that's different between punishment and extinction, okay? When you deny access to something, it never gets old. What I mean by that is you're always gonna feel that. You're like, I deserve this, what the heck? Why am I not getting this? You're always gonna feel that. Because this is basically cutting off the lifeline, the energy to do a behavior. With punishment, okay, let's use a punishment everyone uses. It's also on a similar taking away of timeout, okay? So put someone in for 2 minutes of timeout, right? If they're like 2, that's an eternity. They're not gonna like it. It's gonna be very effective. They're probably gonna stop whatever it was that caused that until they do it again and they get put in timeout again. And then they slip up again and they get timeout again. And eventually they get timeout so frequently that 2 minutes in timeout, they what? They get used to it, right? That's called recovery. So if they're recovering from that, eventually that 2 minutes of timeout functions as what? Does it function as a punisher? If they're used to it? No. It's the same principle with reinforcement. Just like reinforcement can get satiated, punishment can get tolerated. So if you get used to a punishment, if you get used to something, it's no longer punishing to you.
So you call it recovery, so
Yeah.
the same thing as satiated?
It's similar. It's similar effect. It's an AO. It's an AO on the effect of that reinforcer, satiated, tolerating, or just desensitization. What's the ABA terminology is, I think it's habituation to it. Habituation basically is AO for punishment because you're used to it. It doesn't affect anymore. And then that's the sad thing is what you have to do what if you want to continue punishing? You have to increase the punisher. Pretty soon you can start to see that this is not going in a good direction, right? Whereas with extinction, it has the same effect, but it doesn't ever have to be increased because you're not really taking anything away or adding anything. You're just preventing. You're just putting a block. So it's not like, to put it in chemical terms, it's not like you're taking away dopamine. You're just putting a blocker to the receptor, so it's still there, but it's not getting any of it. You're not taking it out. You're not pulling it from the organism once it's experiencing it. If you could do that, I don't even know if you could do that. Can't drain it, right? Once it's contacted.
You can create a situation where it gets reabsorbed quickly.
Okay. So it does reduce it.
Or
So you can reduce.
You
So
can
you-
actually create a situation where it has difficulty becoming reabsorbed as well.
Well, one thing on this note too, just in case you guys are in schools, use token economies, right? You've seen them being used. Those token economies should never have takeaways.
Yeah,
Should never have takeaways. It's always positive.
always positive,
Okay, good.
But people.
But I often see people use it.
People
Oh
do.
yeah, and they shouldn't, because in all honesty, taking it away, really what it does is it mitigates the effectiveness of the thing as a reinforcer. Because that little token they're getting, that little token is not a reinforcer in and of itself, only in the sense that it can be used to purchase something that is reinforcing. So the longer that it takes them to access something that is reinforcing, every time they take 1 step forward or 2 steps forward and 1 step back, you're increasing the delay, right? Before they can actually use it. You're making it less and less. I've seen token economies just die because the kid takes so long to get something. Oh, I got something, oh great. But it takes so long to get something. Oh, I got something. I give up. It's pointless. I don't care. I don't care.
That is true, but at the same time, in this last chapter especially, they did make a point to say that we do want to delay gratification.
You do?
We want to-
You do, but that's once you've got a steady stream of responding. So let's say that you've got the kid earned enough tokens, bought something. Earned enough tokens, bought something. Then you want to extend it. You don't want to start that way. You start that way, you're gonna just it's gonna tire everything out and it's gonna kill it before it even gets a chance to start. All right, so here's an example of a group contingency. If everyone stays in their seats and does their work for the next hour, everyone gets to watch a movie after recess. Extinction example is access to a cookie is not given when a child tantrums, regardless of how long the tantrum lasts. Okay, now we've got direct escape strategies. Now these take the form of alternate direct escape, escaping mans, tolerance training, and pre-mac again. All right, so with alternate direct escape, we're going to reinforce alternate appropriate behavior that grants escape. Okay? So this is basically, if you think about it, Dora, you like to get things off your table, that's escape. That's escape, you like to get it off your table. So, throwing things off your table as opposed to completing them is an example of an alternate to just throwing things off your table. Because some kids will try to get things off their table by crumpling them up and ripping them up and chewing on them and spitting them and whatever. You can also, there's also escape mands. So an individual uses words to request a termination of the stimulus or avoidance of it.
We don't have
We don't
this
have
slide.
We don't.
You don't have this slide?
Yeah, well, we do, but we don't have the, we just got the terms, we don't have the explanation.
Why didn't it go to the next? Don't tell me that it stops there.
We only
Yeah.
have page
Yeah.
three.
It starts at page 3, yeah.
How did that happen?
I do not know. It may have been the printer ran out of paper, and I didn't even know it.
Is it true for all of you though? It stops for all of you?
I think it does, let me double check with the original.
This is gonna be bad. We've got a few slides to go still.
Oh, well, let me see.
How many
I
pages
only
should
have
the
3
other
print
presentation?
out, let me see if I can get back in.
There's only 3 pages on the other presentation as well.
I don't know, I'll have to check.
No, the SMA one, it goes to 4 pages.
Oh, 4, I'm sorry.
Why are you trying to throw things off of me?
Well, hold on, let me see
Just a
what I
rebel.
have in there.
I give you permission to hit and share. But I don't give you, you know, I don't give you escape of the consequences. But if you want to, that's fine.
Replacing the agents.
All right. Well, I guess you guys are just gonna have to go on Fate. These things are on Blackboard as well.
Okay, oh, yeah, there's a whole bunch there.
Yeah. I don't know why it didn't print out. So
Probably no paper.
I take no culpability for that.
Yes, it's all my fault.
Who's calling?
All right. Well, I guess you're just gonna have to look at the PowerPoints up here.
Yeah, I can fix that.
Yeah, but I'm gonna keep going though because I don't burn in time.
Got it.
All right, so alternate direct escape. So you're gonna or escape man. You're gonna basically use a word to request a termination of the stimulus or avoidance of it. You see this one in school a lot, or you see this one in kids a lot. Can I have a break to the restroom? Kids sometimes go break time. If they don't have any language, they might just do this. All done. Saying that, you know, shut up and go away. Shut up and leave me alone. It's probably not the most appropriate language. More like, please, can I have some space? Or, I'm not ready yet. Now, tolerance training. This reinforces the individual for as long as they are engaged in a non-preferred behavior. What this one looks like is essentially the child does not want, or the person does not want to engage in doing something. So they don't want to do their homework, they don't want to do any part of it. All right, well, you know what? If you will do this much of your homework, or if you'll do it for this amount of time, you'll get reinforced. So you don't have to do everything. And then, after you have a small break, we'll come back and finish the rest. Now, again, you don't necessarily have to pair it or have to just have it be by itself. You can pair it with something else. What you do during that break can be incredibly reinforcing as well. You can also reinforce the completion of the activity at the end while reinforcing amount of time on the activity. I did this with a child that hated playing ants in the pants. You ever played ants in the pants? It's like this plastic pair of pants, and you have these plastic flipping ants. Like they're like, I'm not saying it like a replacement for the F word, Jerry. They are flipping ants. So, the look on your face. So basically, you put your finger down on them like this, and they bounce up, right? The goal is to press down on these things, and it's supposed to flip up and fall into the pants. And it's supposed to be for kids 3 and up. I don't know who they think that is 3 and can do that. Because I was trying to do that, and they were going over here, over there, sometimes they would fall just in front of me. It irritated the heck out of me. So when I presented it to this kid, I knew he was not gonna like it. Sure enough, he hated it. So when I told him this, I'm like, all right, you know what? Let's do some tolerance training on him. All right, you're gonna do this for 10 minutes straight. You're just gonna keep doing it. You can talk to me while you're doing it, but you can't stop. You have to keep doing it. If you stop, I stop the timer. So it's gonna be 10 minutes of you doing that. At the end of the 10 minutes, we'll go play. You don't have to put all the ants in there. We'll go play video games for about 5 minutes. Is that cool? All right, I'll do it for 10 minutes. First time he struggled. He would do it for a bit, and then he would drop them on the floor, and I would show him, look, I'm pausing the timer, and he's like, oh, Because he was trying to find little escapes here and there, and I'm like, no, you're gonna do this for 10 minutes. The first couple times was, huh?
That's a long.
It feels like a long time when you're doing something like that, but we used to just talk about stuff after a while, and I used to just keep doing it. Without even realizing it, he was getting better at it. First it was just getting one in. When he got one in, he's like, Paul, I got one in. I'm like, yeah, you got one in, let's keep going.
What?
The first time he got one in, it was like a shock to him. But it was incredibly reinforcing, because after that, he was actually consciously trying to get them in. I think he got another one in before the timer went off, but he was feeling really good. Every day we did that, he started getting more of them in. Pretty soon I had to create a condition, because I liked what he was doing. I said, it's gonna be 10 minutes, or until you put all the ants in the pants. You put them all in the pants, whatever ants, or whatever time is left over, I will add that to the 5 minutes. So if you knock them all in a minute, you could have up to almost 10 minutes of playtime, or 15 minutes of playtime. He was like, before long,
It's getting long.
I had to decrease his time limit, because he was getting it in there in 2 minutes, like doom. It's like, I'm good at this, aren't I, Paul? I'm good at this. And I'm like, you're too good at this. But the fact of the matter is, I turned something that was so aversive that he was crying and screaming and tantruming and, I don't want to do it, to eventually he would ask for it, because he knew what came after it. He knew that if we did that, we got to play. I had turned it into a preferred activity. You could do that with just about any activity out there. It's an incredibly powerful technique. You just have to have a strong enough reinforcement to anchor it to. But you can get a child to succeed in academics as well, or at least to try, because who is it that said, someone said 80% of success is just trying. The 20% comes with practice, but just trying it. If you don't try it, you're not going to succeed. But if you keep trying it, even if you're failing, you keep trying it, you're going to get better at it. It's called practice effects.
What was your, I missed your reasoning for him, actually getting him to sit down and play this game.
Because he hated doing it. He hated doing it, and whenever he was confronted with a non-preferred activity, he would just have a huge meltdown. So we had to target
so he
him.
hated doing, that's the sole reason that he chose it, was because he hated
Yeah.
doing it. Oh, okay.
But it's funny too, you might say, well, what's the point of that? Now he likes doing that. Well, if a child hates doing things and has certain behaviors to escape from those things, breaking that behavior for one of those things has a ripple effect on the other ones. All of his tantrums for escape went down a notch. And then I targeted another behavior or another activity he didn't like to do with a similar reinforcer. Once he got that to be preferred, all the other tantrums went down a notch. It's like he's built up this repertoire of tantruming for non-preferred activities, and I'm just basically showing him that, hey, non-preferred can be fun too. I think it was really non-preferred. It was losing to his little brother. After a while, he was like, hey, he's gonna win, but that's okay, right, Paul? I'm like, yeah, it's all right. When he got to that point, I'm like, my job is done with that, because he's not afraid to lose now. That's huge, because if the child's afraid to lose, they're afraid to take a challenge. Anything challenging automatically becomes non-preferred because they start to feel that's an opportunity to lose. Maybe not lose against a peer, but lose internally with the fact that they can't do their assignment. So getting them to realize that, hey, you know what? It doesn't matter. Let's just keep doing it. We're going to do something fun afterwards. Let's just try it. That is so hard to teach. But once you can teach that, you can get rid of a lot of escape behaviors, especially from challenging assignments in school too. So, what you could also do is you could chain a regimen of non-preferred behaviors to access escape as well. So you want a break right now, I understand, you're tired, right? Well, let's do this, this, and this, and then we can call it a day. So you're tired, it's been a long day, I totally hear you. So here's what we'll do. You're not gonna do everything, you're gonna do this, this, and this, and pick the ones that are the least preferred. You're gonna do these, and we'll call it a day. So honestly, getting them again to get to the point where they're willing to do the least preferred makes everything else more preferred.
So in a school setting, instead of a holiday, you would say you could use your break pass.
That's an example.
What would you do if they were on a bus and didn't want to get on the bus in the morning?
In the morning or at the end of the day?
morning.
Oh man, it's a kid that spat at me that I had to wake up till at 5 a.m. on that. Man, that was rough. It's giving me a lot of bad memories.
Just on the bus, they're having their outbursts.
Well, if they're having outbursts on the bus, I mean, you'd have to see, there's a lot of, the bus is its own environment.
Yeah.
I would find out what's going on the bus in terms of other kids. what is the person doing? Where's the client sitting? There's a lot of variables that you want to take into account with that. And what you could do is you could chain that to reinforcement for the child. I mean, it depends again how long the bus ride is. Some kids have enormously long rides, like an hour. I had this one kid that had an hour bus ride.
Long.
I'd have behaviors after that. Part of that would be,
It's like trying to physically kind of hold them down and make them sit there and it's.
well, I mean, one thing you could do is you could chain the bus ride to a preferred item. It's not what I would do off the top of my head, but it sounds like it's an emergency. So if there's anything at home that he prefers to do, like if there's, most people have electronics of some sorts, iPad or a phone of some kind. Mom is on the bus with him. So mom's on the bus with him, maybe electronics can be something that he can play with while he's waiting to go.
If that's the only place he gets to use it.
In order for that, because that'd be very important too, if he gets to play with that phone all the time at home, then you'd have to do something else, like get an app that he can only play when he's on the bus, or something to that effect. There has to be something special and unique. You can do it after the bus ride, but if the bus ride is too long, he might not make it. So you want him to be reinforced while he's on the bus. So it depends what the behaviors are too. Like, are we dealing with him kicking his seat? Are we dealing with him getting up and running around? I mean,
Yeah, and trying to hurt other people.
okay, well, I mean, that to me is pretty much a cry for not so much escape, but for probably entertainment. You're probably bored to tears. But as much as the wheels on the bus go round and round, there's not a whole lot going inside the actual bus. Except other kids, maybe. You're not allowed to get up and go. It depends, is he an active kid?
Extremely autistic.
Okay. I would see if there's any type of activities he sits down and does, and if there's any way to replicate that in the bus room environment. I don't like to go to electronics right off the bat because it seems to be a catch-all too. But in emergency situations, considering the alternative. Yeah. Well, that's a tough one. Now there's also some direct escape, or here's the examples that I kind of gave you, I guess. So reinforcing walking out of the door as opposed to stampeding outside. So it's time to go, and you know how kids, when it's time to go, they all seem to run outside? Reinforcing the ones that take their time to walk as opposed to the ones that just run out can sometimes have an effect on everybody else. Why did you get that? Oh, because I just walked out instead of running. Oh, I didn't know she did that. Okay, well maybe, because I want 5 minutes more at recess. Or escape mans. Reinforcing a child for asking for a break from activity or for 5 more minutes before engaging in a non-preferred activity. So you're pretty much getting them, this is a break, this is an escape. The other one right here is like they're playing on their iPad or they're doing something fun. 5 more minutes, 5 more minutes. What they're doing is they're seeking to avoid coming back into the classroom or coming back and doing a work activity at home, right? Giving them 5 more minutes for asking so nicely. You can't always do that, but it's nice to do that somewhat intermittently so that they know that it's still an option. And there's tolerance training, which is reinforcing a child with candy for as long as they sit and let the barber cut their hair. I've seen this one happen a lot. I wouldn't use it in school though. Another one is if you finish your homework and walk the dog, I won't ask you to do anything else tonight. You're basically giving them a free night. Just do these 2 things. Now there's socially mediated escape strategies as well, and they're the same as direct escape, but with special attention given to the extinction burst, all right? Now extinction bursts are immediate, certain increases in the child's behavior following implementation of this extinction procedure. Remember we were talking about the behavior going to the next level? It's important to note that it is temporary, and so if you can endure, you can weaken the behavior. It is the most certain, 100% effective way to reduce behavior. I can't say that about any other strategy. You'll have to mix and choose and see how they work with the clients, but extinction is 100% effective. The problem is the burst.
Because it puts everybody in danger around.
It can, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it just creates such an environment that the teacher can't teach or the home. Oftentimes, extinction bursts are best handled in the home environment. There are some times you can do it in the school environment, if, depending on the classroom you're in, and if it can tolerate that kind of outburst. But, you know, extinction bursts can look a lot different depending on what you're extinguishing. If you're extinguishing something that is an automatic behavior, so you're basically trying to prevent them from hand flapping, for example, right? You may see them try to get away and hand flap even harder. If they're trying to escape, and you're not letting them escape, they may try to run away. They may try to do other things and try to get away, you know, more violently. If they want something and you don't give them access to it, they may get more aggressive trying to access that. So it can be, but it's not always aggressive. Sometimes it can just be flat out annoying and disruptive. But it, like I said, it is 100% effective though if you can do it. And really what it comes down to is realizing that the extinction burst is not a permanent thing. Now, it's impossible to gauge how long it takes. You have to kind of do a file review and find out just how long this person's been reinforced with this behavior. Oh, he's been tantruming since he's 5, and if the kid is 15, then it's like, we're dealing with 10 years of history of this kid basically having such, think about it almost in terms of reliability, right? Some people refuse to buy different models of cars or different manufacturers because they've had this one manufacturer for like 10, 15, 20 years. I will never trade out this kind of model or this kind of car because it's so reliable. It's so much faith in that model because there's very few repairs, it's got good mileage. They give you a whole list, right? If a kid were to do that, I'm never getting rid of tantrums because since I was 5, every time I wanted this candy, every time I wanted this cookie, all I had to do was do this tantrum. And if I started to do this, it was even more effective. And it just goes to show that this is the best thing for me. If they were to vocalize it to you. But they're not doing that because it's actually in the back of their mind, in the bottom of their minds. They just get a really good feeling. It's almost like a slot machine. Oh, that's an opportunity to gain money. Sometimes some people look at a slot machine and feel that, right? You look at an ATM, you think, okay, that's an opportunity to withdraw money. You look at an ice cream truck, that's an opportunity to buy ice cream. You know, it's like that. It's like, oh, there's Dora. That's an opportunity to tantrum and get a cookie. And depending how long they've had that, what you're basically doing is, remember, behavior is cyclical. So basically, there's ABCs for you and ABCs ABCs for them and ABCs for you. So let's just cut to their behavior. So they tantrum because you said no to them getting access to something. So they tantrum, right? That consequence is going to determine whether they tantrum or stop. If you give them what they want, they're going to stop. But you just trained their behavior to keep tantruming. You say no to them. Oh no, well you just created a new ABC. So now the ABC up here says, I'm going to tantrum. I just got told no, so I'm going to tantrum even harder and see what the consequence is. To put it in terms of a more, like, I guess, visual, for those of you who are visual learners. Okay, so you got the antecedent. You said no. You got their behavior, which is a tantrum. Your consequence is either going to be I give in or not. Let's say you don't give in. So this is again no, which actually is another antecedent to another chain, which is tantrum. You know what? Let's emphasize this. And that creates another here. Now what happens here is very important. You give in, you basically just turn this into the new tantrum.
So if the family gives in,
It does the same thing. The thing is, though, you have to understand that this right here is all a reflection of the environment the child is in.
It can be broken.
That can be home or that can be school.
Yeah.
So also worth noting is depending on where the pattern exists, that pattern will perpetuate in whichever environment it started in. So if it was in the home, it's more likely to...
At home, it's now showing up at school.
Well, that only happens though. That only happens in this situation. Let's say that the parent gives in. Okay, the parent gave in. And let's say this is at home, right? So then kiddo's gonna try you guys. He's gonna try you guys. But if he has no, now if he already has a history of tantruming in school, then you guys are up a creek. If he has no history of tantruming, that behavior is like a whisper. It's like an experiment. It's like, well shoot, mom and dad always give in. I wonder if Keith's gonna give in. Okay, maybe I'll try him out. This is not, it's not gonna be the same. So let's say we got the same ABCs, right? Let's say that again, you say no. Or you don't react. You don't give in to it, right? Well, he's gonna go, okay, I'm gonna do this again, but instead of it being like that, it might just be like this. It might still be an extinction burst, but it's not a big one. And honestly, depending on the history, if this is a behavior that's newborn, think about it that way, it doesn't have a lot of strength. But if it's been fed and grown and worked out and exercised, sometimes you're dealing with past school experience as well. The good news though is every teacher, every classroom you get switched into is an opportunity for a new environment. Depending on the history, it may not completely make it weak like that, but it'll definitely be weaker than the last environment it was reinforced in.
So if it's to an explosive point, then maybe if you're going to really work on replacement behaviors, one of the foundations might be to see if you could put them in a different classroom to
Sometimes.
start the new.
Sometimes that is best, especially if you're dealing with a behavior that's been happening all year long and you're now in like May, or not May, you're now in March and you're like, this is
And
still
now the
happening.
other kids are in
Yeah.
danger and.
One thing you can also do, this is really volatile. Let's just assume that's been a tantrum that's been built up for 10 years, right?
Because they're high school and they're big and they're.
Let's say-
boy.
Let's say with that tantrum, okay, this is what the tantrum looks like. Let's say there is, let's start at the bottom. The bottom ends with head banging. So that's at the end of his tantrum, okay? So he's getting self-injurious. Let's just say he's getting here, right? But,
Tries to knock over.
but before he gets there,
cabinets.
he gets knocking over cabinets. Before he gets there, he gets shouting. Before he gets to shouting, he starts hand flapping. Okay, before he gets to hand flapping though, he starts to whine. And it's a very specific kind of whine, let's just say. Let's just say it's not like, I don't want to, let's just say it's like, goes here and then it starts to, he starts throwing things over and then he starts banging his head on the wall. That's the behavioral sequence identified as the tantrum, right?
Mhm.
What you might do, because right now this is extremely, it has a very strong potential for disruption, okay? You'd have to ask yourself first, what is he trying to access? That's the first question. Depending on what he's trying to access, you'll know how to answer the next one. If he's trying to access something that's really like, just you can't have it, well, you know what, then you're gonna have to pursue some alternative things to work with. But if it's something you can give him, with minimal disruption, or give him a piece of it with minimal disruption, or access to it for a time with minimal disruption, you're gonna wanna give in, and you're gonna wanna give in at this point.
You just give her the iPad if that was what you were doing.
Yeah, and you do that. And unfortunately, you're gonna have to do that in proportion with the amount of time, give or take, that he has been reinforced for that headbanging. Because when you look at a tantrum, right, you're reinforcing all of these already. Or you're taking him out of the classroom, at which point
You lost.
you've lost, he's lost, everybody's lost. And you just gotta throw up your hands in the air. But if you can give him this, at that point, you might see it as again losing, but there's some notable differences. One is he's still in the classroom, okay? Two, he's now getting it for a behavior that is like way less severe and disruptive than headbanging and knocking over cabinets and all that kind of disruption, okay? And what you're gonna do, one moment, what you're gonna do is you're gonna reinforce that for a set duration of time. You're gonna have to get together with your team and say, okay, how long can we give into this to reset him? Because that's what you're doing. You're resetting his tantrum. This is still a tantrum because this is the precursor. Honestly, if you can nail a precursor before this, so you can start noticing him start to heavy breathe or start to tap his foot or something small, that's even better than whining. But if you can get the precursor down, eventually, this stuff starts to go away. Pieces of it start to fall apart because he starts to forget what he used to do in the past here.
So it doesn't even matter then what the parent does at home and goes in and all that because you reset it within a different environment.
Yeah, and eventually what will happen is this. When you have decided that you are at this certain point, and you have to decide this previously, you have to say, okay, we're gonna give this a month or whatever, depending on how robust this behavior is. At that point, we're gonna then throw an extinction burst his way. What will probably happen is you're probably gonna get hand flapping again, maybe shouting. And you might notice him get out of his chair and kind of be aimless, but at that point, he has been reinforced for this. That is where he is at. The thing about an extinction burst is it's temporary. Remember, it's not long lasting. And think about it as a car, right? Burning fuel, right? And the extinction burst is like the turbo. So it's burning fuel twice as fast. So let's say I'm tantruming, I could tantrum for about an hour, right? And then you say no to me. I amp it up, so it's twice as volatile, but it's also dying twice as fast. A lot of that is due to physical fatigue, emotional fatigue, but honestly, it's due to also the fact that, the only thing worse, I mean, this is for future reference, after you've succeeded with this and you de-escalated the tantrum and basically you didn't give in, you didn't give them a consolation prize, that's a huge thing too. So once the child's tantrum and they're kind of looking like really kind of feeble and not sure what just happened, don't give them something good. Give them an activity to do and then you can reinforce that, but don't make that activity reinforcing in and of itself. So make it be like an assignment, make it be something like, okay, help me clean up the class, help me to do this or whatever. And then after that, you might be able to give them some small amount of reinforcement, but you don't want to ever reinforce right after the extinction burst, because it's almost like reinforcing him for the burst. The next time he's going to think about it, and this is why extinction is so effective. The next time he's going to think about engaging in that behavior with you in that environment, he's going to remember that last experience. And it might not stop him, but it will definitely diminish what he tries and for how long. Let's look at an example. There used to be a vending machine out here. I taught this class last year when they had one out here. Vending machine had these tasty crackers, or cookies, okay? You put your money in, you push the button, it goes,
Stop.
it just stops. It's using extinction on you. What do? You just go, them's the brakes, and just walk away? No.
Then you hit the.
You get mad, you shake the machine, try to move it, try to reach underneath and grab. You try all these weird behaviors. Maybe even look for somebody to help you. Maybe you do all these weird things, right? And you're gonna do it for a certain amount of time in proportion to how valuable that cookie is to you. That cookie was $10, you're probably gonna be pretty upset that you didn't get it. I don't know why you'd spend $10 for that cookie, it must have gold in it. But if that cookie was like 50 cents, you might be like, whatever, right? Either way, you're gonna have some kind of reaction to not getting what you want. Let's assume that you don't get it. You can't shake it loose. No one can help you. What do? Sleep out overnight? No. You go home. Go to class. You go away. The next day you see that vending machine, okay? Are you gonna be as eager to put money in it to get what you want? But you still might. Maybe they fixed it. Put it in it. Same thing happens. Two things are gonna happen. Then you're never gonna put money in that again, probably. Unless you really love those cookies and you can't get them anywhere else. The other thing is, whatever reactions you had the previous day, you're not gonna be able to do them to the same extent. You might shake it a little, you might knock it a little, but you're not gonna have the same energy because you remember the outcome last time. The outcome last time was you didn't get what you wanted for what your effort was. And you didn't get what you wanted even after you tried harder. Because in reality, the only thing worse than not getting what you want for your effort is when you put forth more effort and not get what you want. And that feeling sticks with a person and shapes a person. And it shapes them in a very passive way, but it's a very profound way. It's nothing personal, you just don't get access to this way. That's when insertion of a replacement behavior is very valuable, because it's like the person's at the point where they're like, well, damn it, that doesn't work. Who do I have to poo on to get what I want here? And you're like, no, you don't have to do that. You just have to ask nicely. So they're already looking for a replacement behavior. And if you don't give them one, they're gonna scroll. They're gonna scroll different responses. And they're all gonna be ugly, they're all gonna be nasty, because those are the ones we pay the most attention to. They're not gonna be this. They're not gonna be this. They're gonna be nasty. Because the simple truth is that we don't pay attention to nice. We pay more attention to stuff that isn't. So. Now, extinction bursts can occasionally lead to intermittent schedules of reinforcement. You gotta watch out for that. Intermittent meaning that sometimes you handle the burst, sometimes you don't. Don't go there. Don't become a slot machine. Don't. Because they're gonna pull the handle each time, and they're gonna wonder if you're gonna give them exactly what they want. If you don't, it's fine, but if you do it inconsistently, and you sometimes do, they're gonna feel like millionaires. That's actually more reinforcing because it sounds almost like they earned it more. And it's so sad too, because if you've actually succeeded in extinction a couple times, then chances are the behavior is starting to die out and get weaker, but you just fed it. Why'd you do that? So don't. And we asked this question, I think, last class, which are easier to extinguish, the ones that are consistently reinforced or the ones that are intermittently? And the answer is yes. Because the paradigm is more clear. If you do that resetting or recalibration of the tantrum like what I showed you up there, you're going to start to see that the behavior starts to become much less profound and much weaker, right? And it's reinforced every single time. Behavior is going to get lazy. It's going to get fat. It's not going to be battle tested. And then when you finally take it to the point where you're going to use extinction on it, it's not going to be able to go all the way to where it was before, because it's so conditioned and trained to just get what it wants with that little bit. Why are you doing that? You may see other behaviors, but chances are you're not going to see the same velocity. And if you're prepared for it, you could probably nip whatever he's going to throw at you right in the bud.
I think it's getting a buy-in for the extinction first.
Well, that's what I'm saying, because if
They
you
don't get that, it's not.
no, and you have to really train them, and you have to kind of explain it, kind of like what I told you guys, because if they just see that it gets worse, it's like this. You go to a doctor for medication, right? For antibiotics. Your cold doesn't get worse; it gets better, right?
Yeah.
So common sense says that when I'm doing the right thing, it's going to get better. But with behavior, you always have to go from the notion that if you're doing the right thing, it's going to immediately get worse, and then it's going to get better. If you don't see any effect at all, that's what you're going to see. So.
I have a question. In like a classroom setting where you have more than one behavior problem, like a class I'm thinking about, the computers are like a really big thing. Everybody wants to get on computers. So one student, he wants to get on the computer so bad, he'll do his work, but every problem, can I go now, and you keep with him, he'll do it all once he can get on the computer. And there's another student who doesn't want to do any work at all, and he'll just show the class, be disrespectful, whatever he can do to try to get to the computer. The fear I would have is if you stop it, okay, don't do that, just get on the computer, it's gonna mess up the other kid, because then he's gonna say, well, wait, he just got to get on without doing anything.
That is true. If you're in a classroom where they're that self-aware and they're that closely monitoring it, you have to meet the kids where they're at. So if both kids are at the same level, then you have a valid argument there. Now with that other kid, one thing you could do while you're also trimming it down to just the whining, before you, eventually you're going to take it to extinction, but before you do that, what you can start to do is slowly increase the response cost. So in addition to whining, maybe, hey, just do a little bit, do a little bit, do a little bit. After a while, you'll start to notice that you'll be able to get him to do more. So don't have it just be just with that whining. If you have a class where everyone's really self-aware and they're gonna start feeling that it's unfair and stuff like that and throw that stuff at you, then you're gonna have to be a little more complex with it. I mean, one size does not fit all, but eventually you're gonna have to use extinction. Sometimes you can de-escalate a behavior by giving partial reinforcement with some work. Depends. For that child that we're talking about with the whining and the flipping and everything like that, what usually sets him off?
They don't know. They haven't figured it out. That's why I said you have to
That's the
figure out.
first step.
That's why I said, what's the antecedent? They're like, well, what's that? So, we'll figure it out.
You'll have to figure it out because you can't just use that without it. You have to have a replacement behavior in mind, and then find the easiest way to put it in there.
Yeah, and they're not seeing any of the precursors either, which they really have to identify.
They do.
haven't identified the behavior.
They just know that it's like all of a sudden he's flipping
going-
over things.
Yeah,
and-
and it's random. Well, we know it's not.
yeah, no, it's
Well,
not.
you
It's
taught
just
me that.
Yeah.
Before I'd be like, oh, it's just random, but now. you
nothing
know.
is more
not
like
random.
scary or debilitating, I would even say, than feeling that a behavior is random. It's random, well, shoot, that, you know what else is random? Hurricanes can be random, tornadoes, earthquakes, so they're acts of God. We can't do a darn thing about them, we just have to prep for them. That is a terrible mentality if you think about it, because it's completely reactionary. It
Yeah.
means you can't do anything proactively. Finding out the actual nuances of what that behavior is doing, even if there's phases to it, honestly, it sounds like the staff aren't paying attention to the huge class.
It's a, well, no, it's, you know, special, severe class.
Sometimes in classes where there's a lot of students with severe
Wow.
needs, and
Well,
they,
12,
are they all like that kid though?
not at that same level, but yeah. I mean, they're
Okay.
severe, but they don't have the behavior.
Honestly, sometimes you might be seeing some escape, or rather avoidance behavior in the staff. Because they're afraid of what sets him off, they
They're
don't
afraid
wanna
of
set
him.
him off, and so that's one thing. Another thing might be just that because they know that he is so quote unquote random, they'd rather focus on other kids that they feel some degree of success with than focus on the kid that is actually just unknown and uncontrollable, and they avoid it. People do that, they focus on the assignments that they're really good at and procrastinate on the assignments they don't feel as they're as successful on. So sometimes you'll see that behavior in your staff. The trick is then for them to realize, you know what, this kiddo has potential, it's just we need to get past this behavior to see what that potential really is.
And there's the two places, the bus and then,
Oh, this is the bus kid too.
yeah, it's just
Fun. Oh, that's what yeah, that sounds fun. I mean, finding out those, once you get to the point where you stop fearing the behaviors and you actually get to the bottom of why they're occurring, that's when it gets really fun. Because every behavior is almost like a mystery case. Like, why is this kid doing that? Like, what are you getting out of this? Like, what's the point of this? There is one. It's not that there's no reason and it's random and it's mysterious. There is always a function behind it. There's nothing that is truly random. There's only patterns that we haven't identified yet. They can be very complex. They can even be for variables that we don't know about. That's the closest you're gonna get to a mystery, is if there's a variable you don't know about that's affecting things. But yeah, we definitely,
it doesn't really matter that at home he can do whatever he wants, because they give it all the time, because this.
I mean, it would be desirable if they were trying to stop it in the home, but in all honesty, if you treat your school environment as its own environment, you should be able to control it. The problem is, though, it depends on, has he attended your environment for a long time? Is he conditioned to that particular school with that staff? More specifically, are the staff conditioned to him? Because sometimes staff can get conditioned to a client and just expect that that's the way the student's gonna act, there's nothing we can do about it. They just focus on avoiding behavior and maintaining it without really confronting it.
Maintaining it.
Yeah, they don't wanna contain it, they don't wanna confront it, is what it is. It's almost like that thing, well, if we just avoid it, we won't have to deal with it. But at the end of the day, that behavior is a major hurdle to that child learning, right?
Yeah.
And as educators, we kind of have to take it upon ourselves. Well, okay, if there's a behavior that's impacting this child, we have to at least make a good faith effort to stop it. Now, it might be that your school doesn't have the facilities to really contain this behavior and really contain this child, but at the very least, because I mean, as a school psych, I remember making referrals that way too, but I remember the staff who were behaviorally trained before I knew about ABA, they would do their best to mitigate behaviors and confront them and deal with them, or at least get the function identified before sending them to another school where it could be more properly handled. That way, when it got to that new environment, replacement behaviors were in place, that interim IEP could function as not just, or that change of placement could not just function as an IEP, but also as an opportunity for saying, all right, we're ready for this kiddo. We know that he functions under this, we know that this is a replacement behavior, we're just gonna do it. It's a new environment, he's not gonna know what to do, we'll show him what to do.
Problem is, school psychs aren't trained,
No, they're not.
like, in this is all new.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Welcome to my world about, 6 years ago? Do you have headaches yet? Yeah, they go away. They go away.
And just like the fact that, I don't know, this is off the topic, but Connor was talking about how processing disorders are not really processing disorders.
Not.
Well, how do you as a school psych and BCBA really,
It's
because
complicated.
then your job is not real anymore.
That
As
was
a
that
school
was
psych.
that was what gave me the most headaches.
When I was talking to him, I'm like, well, nobody has a processing.
Connor's not a
disorder,
school
they
psych,
don't
is
know
he?
that. No, he's not.
Okay.
So then I'm thinking, well, how do you really meld those two?
You conceptualize it in
Yeah.
terms of what identifies it. So, okay, when you're looking at, let's say, an auditory processing is by a TAPS or TARPS, and you've got your, your VC on your Wyatt is showing that there's like a lot of verbal issues, there's a lot of auditory
Yeah.
stuff. It's all speaking to you, auditory processing. You have to ask yourself, okay, what are we really seeing with this? We're seeing a child who's having difficulty whenever questions are asked at him, okay? A lot of the TARPs and TAPS, it's all questions. Okay, so he's struggling, maybe you'll see discrepancies in terms of what questions are asked to him, as well as in certain subtests on those tests. Same thing with the Wyatt or WISC rather, you might see certain things there as well. If you cross-reference those with the Wyatt and see how he's doing in other areas, then it's like, all right, so this child is capable of, let's say it's like textbooks. So we've got good nonverbal, we've got good PRI, we've got good, on his Wyatt, we've got good academics in other areas, and just specifically in reading comprehension and in some of the specific listener comprehension, we're seeing that there's this low score across the board. We're like, oh, it's textbook. Well, if you look at that, what you really have identified is a child who struggles with hearing questions, but when they're presented in a visual format, you may see something completely different.
Yeah.
So it's not that the processing disorder doesn't exist, it's just how you conceptualize it. So don't conceptualize it as an internal processing disorder. Don't conceptualize it as an internal, don't conceptualize intelligence as an immutable permanent number, because that will throw you off too.
Yeah.
Consider intelligence as a measure of his academic achievement or his capabilities demonstrated by that test for that moment in time. It's a snapshot. It's a snapshot. Right. Meaning it's subject to change. High functioning can become low functioning can become high functioning. It's a movable number.
I agree.
So then you're looking at visual or auditory processing and just look at it in terms of what you're actually seeing in terms of permanent product that gives you the idea that that is there. Dissect it. Just like what you would do with autism spectrum disorder, right? Or ED, right?
Okay.
So you see certain characters, he's like he has an inability to establish that satisfactory relationships, right? Okay, that's a very social dynamic. Are there other social dynamics that stick with that kid that are issues? You might find that instead of just looking at the disorder and looking at the components, it'll help you to address the situation more clearly. I know parents would actually probably buy into that more than just saying that there's a processing disorder within your child, because I remember having a couple parents challenge me on that back when I was a school psych, and I couldn't answer them.
Well,
I mean, I could answer them with this typical test. Well, this test has been normed against this population, and it's found to be valid with within this confidence interval. I'd have all these numbers and statistics and great factoids for them, but it still didn't explain to them, well, why does he have it? You know, you could go out on a limb and say, you know what? There's a variety of reasons that are possible. One reason he's possibly doesn't have a visual and he has an auditory is because maybe he's been more reinforced for responding to visual stimuli than for auditory.
Connor
Yeah.
said it just means that whatever their strength is was what they were most
Yeah.
reinforced in. So I'm
Yeah.
having a hard time really
I mean,
balancing
it's
those.
not invalidating what you learned. It so much as it's it may feel that way. It may feel that way. It may feel that way, and you're not wrong for feeling that way. That's how I felt at first too. But then what I started realizing is that every disorder under the sun, just about every disorder, I should say, not everyone. I don't want to encapsulate everyone, but just about everything that you can do at school psych, you can actually conceptualize it in a more almost like piecemeal sort of way, and dissect it for the parents. So you can say, you know what, like with that explanation you gave, is saying, you know what. A lot of times what we're doing is we're measuring how this person's performing at this point in time. What you're asking me is what led to this point in time, and that can be a huge unknown. I can throw at you some various hypotheticals that might explain it, but none of them are 100% true. What we do know though, I mean, you can go in and say, you know, maybe it was more reinforced for visual than auditory. Maybe it was something that started at an early age where auditory just came more difficult to him than the visual. People have strengths and weaknesses all across the board. You could probably go all the way back to saying it's whatever you were first reinforced with as an infant. Ultimately though, at this point in time, it would for all sakes and appearances appear that your child has strengths in the visual. He's more willing to respond, he's more attentive. You could even point to that out. You could say, you know what, during the auditory processing tests, I noticed that I had to rein him in a few more times because he was looking away, he was engaging in other things, there wasn't as much eye contact, he wasn't engaging with me as much. That tells me that for him, this is not a preferred activity. So that might also be that. It may also come back to motivation. It's more motivating for him to engage in nonverbal and the visual than to engage in what is auditory. The trick now is to make the auditory more reinforcing, not to make the visual less, but just to make the auditory more reinforcing for him.
I just wanted to add, when you look at therapy and you look at Freud, he was all about making the unconscious conscious. When you look at Rogers, he kind of said the same thing, except he called it a different word. He called it insight. And then, of course, Freud was using dream analysis and free association to try to create insights, basically, making the unconscious conscious. And Rogers would use basically a non-directive approach, listening and magnifying. So they're doing kind of the same thing, except they're doing it in a different way.
The biggest thing is the emphasis on the external. More of the time as well. So emphasizing the external. You don't want to emphasize the internal as much, you want to emphasize what's externally visible. Because that's stuff you can do things about. You can't do things about stuff that's internal. You can't reach in and say, we're gonna fix this auditory processing deficit. As a matter of fact, I remember telling some parents actually that it'll never go away. What you can do is you can tell them that we're gonna work on the skills that present low in this area, and we're gonna find out why they are that way. What we're gonna do then is we're basically gonna motivate him more in those areas, because right now, they're more challenging to him. And honestly, if you think about it, that's really what special education, at least with SLD, should emphasize. Because if a person has a deficit in a certain area, then every academic component that's associated with that area is going to be strong or weak. It's going to be weak.
It's gonna be weak, so then you exploit their strength, and then you rely even more on their strength, which makes the weakness even more weak, it seems like we.
Because there is a mentality to exploit the strength and ignore the weakness, but that often lends itself to imbalance. And some areas they're gonna be superstars, and some areas they're not gonna be able to tie their own shoes. So you don't want them to have that kind of polarity.
So, but I guess maybe my understanding is skewed. Aren't a lot of these processing deficits associated with neuropsychological regions of the brain that are actually impaired?
It's possible. I don't know. I haven't
So
really been following that research. Have they identified certain parts of the brain having that, or?
We're learning a lot more with magnetic imagery
Mhm.
than we thought could be capable in the past. I mean, they're doing research right now on Alzheimer's.
Right.
And trying to with deep brain stimulation, putting electrodes in the brain, stimulating certain parts of the brain to see if they can turn on what's been turned off, which is glucose functioning in
Right.
the major centers of the brain. And they're actually, with some of the initial trials now going on with mild Alzheimer's, is they're seeing that they are turning on parts of the brain that have been turned off. And they're seeing the same thing with depression.
You can always impact parts of the brain by directing it or by influencing it directly like that.
Yeah.
You can also influence the brain through the other way too. I remember in one of your classes, it might have been you, where you said you could attitude. Well, no, was it your class or was it Shirley's? One of them said attitudes can affect behaviors and behaviors can affect your attitudes, right? So looking at it from this perspective, right? I remember seeing this thing that was pretty popular back then. I don't know if it still is now, but it was basically for kids with attention deficit. Basically, what was identified was when someone said to you, focus, and you had attention deficit, whether it was ADD or ADHD, I don't remember specifically, but when someone said to you to focus, the hypothesis was the person doesn't know what that means. Like, they've never been able to focus in their life. So you're basically telling, a fish to fly when they don't know how to do that. And so they don't know how to focus. So what they came up with were these things, I don't know if you've seen them, they're like these electrodes that are attached to the video game systems.
Yeah.
And when they're focusing on the video game, when they're focusing and deeply focused, the video game rewards them with certain buffs, certain advantages, almost like cheats. From that, it basically hones them to focus in on it, because then it's like, okay, I'm just focused, that means I've gotten it. So it's almost like it taught them how to do it, and they've noticed that it has a generalizing effect to their focus outside. Now, if you look at that is completely behavioral, because
one study,
that's conditioning.
Yeah, one study with 100 students, they were able to eliminate medications completely in 40%
Oh wow.
of those individuals and reduce the amount of medication in all of life. And I'm not anti-meds, I'm definitely a medication advocate in certain cases. process.
And that was because of the
But
stimulation?
one study with biofeedback and no feedback. Of course, we have to see replication before we
Yeah,
become
yeah.
much more confident about this process. But the goal with biofeedback is to increase beta, because that's our focus. You know, alpha, theta, delta, those are other things, but beta is what we want. And we also know that the dopamine, system is the most effective with ADHD. When your dopamine is overactive, it usually looks like schizophrenia. When it's underactive, it
Right.
usually looks like ADHD. So it's all very complicated.
Yeah, and I mean, you can
I
look at,
mean,
you can look at SLDs as
slice-
being
slice.
like, I think what it means when it says that they don't exist is that you can say that certain parts of the brain are activated at certain points and that designates X, right? But until you're able to go in and refute without a, and it sounds like they're getting there.
They're
getting there
actually
with
showing
brain
the
scans.
images of the
Right.
brain when
But
they're
until
active,
they're
right?
able to get to the point where they can do that with every individual that goes through the doors of a school, and they're at that point, you really can't rely on it in terms of like the actual practice.
It's gonna have to get a lot better. than
And it
what
might,
is
you
now.
know, it might. They might get to a point, because honestly, ABA doesn't say that those things don't exist because it has a stick up its butt. It says they don't exist because you can't see it. Now, if you can through electromagnetic, imaging, if you can through things like that,
Oh,
then you can see it.
They are definitely.
And if you can see it, then you can actually, what it might actually lend itself to, actually behavioral interventions that target that, because when reinforcement
Then you
occurs.
can see how
Right.
accentuated your intervention is
Well,
actually
and
being.
you can see reinforcement on the brainwave scan, because honestly, when a person is reinforced, there is a dopamine release. That's the essence of it. It's addiction in the sense that I just did something right, I want to keep doing this.
Feels good.
My daughter went to the Amen Clinic and we did the brain scans,
Mhm.
and we were able to see, that she had a lazy cerebellum or that she had overactive hypothalamus. So then I was able to pinpoint to cognitive behavior strategies
Mhm.
to either, calm down the overactive hypothalamus, or what to look for if I had OCD behaviors that could happen, to cut them off quickly,
Right.
or how to activate the cerebellum. And then the medications for the ADHD they were able to pinpoint them more accurately for her.
You know what, I regardless of the diagnosis, I've seen tremendous things. I've taught a kid who had CP how to use safety scissors. I mean, she had CP, but she was able to use safety scissors with the dexterity, not just to cut out shapes from paper, but to be able to cut, kindergarten yarn, how it's that, you can't use scissors on it because it goes like rang, it gets like twine. She was able to have the dexterity to cut slow enough that she could cut it. I can't even do that. This is a kid with CP, and the only way that we trained her how to do that was simply through repetition and practice. A lot of it,
Scans though, they help you really actually
Well,
pinpoint.
Well, honestly, I didn't even, you don't, the thing is, you can do that if you have the technological resources, because actually, she did. I mean, she was going to was it UCLA, I think, because she had a variety of things going on with her. She did not have autism, but that was her diagnosis. She had CP and a whole bunch of other things. But what they ended up finding out with her is that even without the brain scans and everything, what we did was just simply look at the facts. Facts are, she can't hold scissors. She can't even put her fingers through them properly. Okay, so that was our first challenge. How do we get her to put the fingers through? So we started to make the activity fun. We started to get creative with the games. We started to just get her to practice it. First time she cut a piece of paper, she was super excited, but it was a horrible cut. I mean, it wasn't even like completely through, but she was like, well, I cut the paper, boy, I cut the paper. I'm like, yeah, you cut the paper, great job, let's try it again. Basically, all we do is we look at the facts we have on the table. I didn't have to know she had CP. I could have just looked at it and seen, okay, she has difficulty with fine motor, I don't know why, but she does. Actually, I'd had a predecessor on the case who's a friend of mine, refused to work on scissors with her, refused to work on anything fine motor because of her diagnosis, and I thought that was wrong. I said, the mom agreed with me, I said, let's just give it a shot, what's the worst that could happen? She's not cutting now, she won't be cutting then, that's the worst that can happen, right? Let's give it a shot. But because we tried, and because we practiced, whatever was going on neurologically, whatever kind of things were going on, what other problems with her nervous system, whatever, that are preventing her from holding it and having a weak fine motor in that hand, we overcame them. And we didn't do it because of anything special, it was just simply practice effects. Practice effects with motivation, because you can force someone to do it. That kid with the ants in the pants, he had fine motor too. I mean, it wasn't just an aversion thing. I mean, there was a reason why he didn't like to do it. I didn't like to do it either, and I don't have fine motor problems, but eventually he grew to love it. Now, that's not going to happen with everything, but one of the things that's incredibly empowering about the science is if you get a kid with an SLD, if you get a kid who's ED, if you get a kid who has CP or something else that's almost like, or Down syndrome. Down syndrome is a huge one, even in ABA, most behaviorists tend to shy away from Down syndrome because of just how obstinate they can be. They can be motivated and their behavior can be changed as well. I've had a lot of kids that I've had with Down syndrome that I've basically been able to motivate them. Are they like gonna be like valedictorians? Probably not. But it's far above whatever their pediatricians told their parents. At the end, that girl was able to cut out complex stars and shapes, and she was thrilled doing it. It was like we had opened an entire new world for her with arts and crafts, because she had not had any exposure to that before because of her diagnosis. So those diagnoses do exist. I don't want you to feel like all your school psych stuff has been just completely washed away and wiped away. They do exist. Conceptually, they may be taking a different form, like through brainwave scans and stuff like that. But honestly, explaining them in a pragmatic form, it'll do two things. One is it'll help you and your teachers basically design remedies for them that are not just going to be the cookie cutter, cut from one report to the next. And two, the parents aren't going to feel like you're trying to pull the wool over their eyes. Because I had this one parent that brought a folder this thick. This says that your IQ test doesn't work. And I was like, gosh, it's a DNQ. So I knew what she was going for with that, you know? And it sucked just being able to come at her saying that this is an intelligence test that's been normed on this, with the basic jargon that you throw at parents, why you use the test, what standard error means, stuff like that. How no, I can't be 100% sure, but I can be 98 and 95% sure. And honestly, she wasn't buying it because at the end of the day, I wasn't giving her something that was pragmatic and on the table.
I think probably the greatest gift we can give to whatever target populations we work with, clients, is to be so familiar with so many variety of interventions, because you don't know what's gonna work with who.
Right.
And to embrace the paradigms that exist. You know, because if they get better with one paradigm versus another, who cares? They're getting better, right?
Honestly, that's the truth.
And that's the most important thing, you know, and that, in one of my classes, I say, you know, learn as many therapeutic approaches as you can, because you may have your favorites, but that might not be the
You know what
one
you're
that works with
you-
that client.
You know what you're gonna find out, because what Doris is saying is absolutely true, but you're gonna find out as you keep learning more and more, and as it slowly starts to like cohabitate in your mind without fighting with the school psych portion, is you're gonna start to notice that ABA can technically it's almost like an amorphous blob that just consumes everything in its wake. It takes the best parts of every other science out there, and it holds on to it. It takes the most effective parts of every science out there. And if something works in a science, if something works,
If it works, it works.
if it works, it works. And what you'll find yourself doing is you'll find yourself using behavior analysis to explain why it's working. And granted, it's going to be very different from what the practitioners are of that science. But a good example would be OT. Like there's a lot in OT that is very, very different than ABA. And I know a lot of OTs that are BCBAs. And what they've done is they'll use similar, they won't use everything, but they'll use some pieces of it and they'll say, you know what? This works, but not for the reason that OT says it works. It works because of this. Like an example would be with speech and language, actually. They use a lot of repetition with language, with flashcards, right? ABA does the exact same thing. We just don't call it articulation, we call it echoics. And it works, but to us, it doesn't work just because you're throwing a flashcard up and they're repeating it. It works because you're basically getting them to repeat the sounds and they're getting practice. It's just conditioning.
Yeah, it
So-
seems like ABA things we've been doing forever as teachers with discipline is just like making a different name on it.
Yeah.
Actually, it's the other way around. Direct instruction, precision teaching, those actually were started with ABA.
But I mean, there's other things, just like
Yeah.
contingency, you know.
Well, right, but if
We've been doing that
the
since-
beautiful thing is that I mean a lot of the concepts from ABA and teaching, honestly, ABA psych always wants to own behavior analysis, like psych. I mean, they had to go out of their way in the 60s to kind of split from the world of psychology. But in terms of what it shares the most commonalities with, it's with education.
Yeah.
It's essentially training and teaching conceptualized in its purest, rawest form. You will find a lot of teaching strategies that basically either have their roots in ABA and have a different name, or they may have just basically been developed at the same time. I mean, ABA is not going to claim ownership of everything, but there's a lot of things that you'll see that were either inspired by or had some piece in it. Because what unfortunately happens is that people tend to take what they like out of hearing something and then leave the rest.
Well, and the problem sometimes is that people will attack anything, whether it's
Yeah.
it's behavioral analysis or medications or what have you. And I'm a proponent to tell people, you know, hey, does ADHD not have side effects? You know, when they're talking about medication side effects, I mean, you know, when you know 80% of kids who have ADHD who don't have successful treatment outcomes and gravitate towards substance abuse, is Ritalin such a bad, I mean, does ADHD not have side effects?
Yeah.
Yes, it does. So
Yeah.
what works,
I
and everything is
I
gonna
remember
Everything.
hearing that when dealing with medication versus ABA, that actually a study that was done, I can't remember which one it was, it's gonna bug me now, but they did a study seeing which worked best on a certain population. I think it was dealing with ADD or ADHD. And basically they were saying, okay, so we've got the medication only as one treatment, we've got the behavior analysis as one treatment, and the combo. And what the study found, and it was really conclusive, is that the combo is what works the
That's
best.
really combo. Those are all just one piece of the puzzle. You have
Right.
diet, you have exercise, cognitive.
And one thing that ABA never
meditation.
dares to go in and say that if the medical condition exists, that you should use ABA on top of that. So for example, if someone's scratching themselves and you want them to stop,
Most will say it's the
check out to make sure they don't have a skin condition.
interconnected
Right,
thread
right.
that treat from all
That
directions.
that said, don't ever let, I mean, as long as it's within the realm of not violating ethics, like with the CP and the cutting with the scissors, it didn't violate ethics because there was no harm that was going to befall the child for trying to engage in that. The worst case scenario would be, okay, this is an aversive activity. We weren't going to push her to it. We weren't going to have her get self-injurious on us or anything like that. She actually wanted to try it. We asked her, we tried to motivate her, she bought it, she wanted to try it. That was the key piece. So I remember there was another student last year who had a daughter, Carrie.
Carolyn.
Yeah,
That's
Karen
right,
Linda. Yeah,
right,
and her
right.
daughter was a vegetative state. I remember
Right,
we
right.
used her as a project. She consulted with me on that. They were able to get some responses out of her that they weren't able to get before. And this is a
Right.
person in a semi-vegetative state that had pretty much been written off.
Right.
You can get behavior out of something as long as it can live, eat, breathe, and have simple biological functions. You can get behavior out of it. I've seen amoebas being trained, conditioned to move a certain way. And those are just single-celled organisms. So if it works on those, don't let a debilitating diagnosis of or designation of ID or ED or anything like that or SLD get in the way. Conceptualize it, understand what you're going to do if you're like me is you're going to look at those diagnoses or those designations and say, all right, that gives me a starting point. I kind of know where to go with this kid in terms of remedies, and they're going to be specific for this kid because now we know where his weaknesses are.
So what if the kid never bought into using the scissors? Would you still like?
We wouldn't have forced it.
Okay.
I would almost say, I said 80% of success is just trying. I would go and say the other 80%, and I know that's over 100%, the other 80% is getting them to want to try. You can force a child to do, and I could force that child to do ants in the pants. I could have forced him. But at the end of the day, he was willing to tolerate with my crap. You missed it, Dora. I basically forced this kid for 10 minutes. You play ants in the pants? It's that plastic pants where you push these little plastic things down, they flip into the pants.
No.
I'm gonna buy it and bring it to you guys so you can see how annoying this activity is. I don't want to do
I think
it.
I've heard you talk about
Yeah,
it.
Yeah, you talked about
Huh?
last quarter.
Yeah.
No, it's not a fun game. It's fun if you're good at it. I